There is a moment near the very start of Avatar, The Last Airbender, where a girl and her brother stand on a slab of drifting ice at the bottom of the world, and something under the water is glowing. A boy is sealed inside it, sitting cross-legged, his eyes and the arrow on his forehead burning a cold white, and he has been down there, holding himself alive for 100 years. That is where the whole story begins, and tonight it is also a kind of promise, because we are going down. This is Ember, and this is a slow descent through the layers of Avatar, from the things almost every fan already knows on the surface, down through the deeper canon, the darker corners, the novels and the word of the creators, all the way to the strange cold bottom where the theories live. None of this needs your full attention, so get comfortable, turn the lights down low, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it genuinely helps us keep making these. Let's start at the top, where the ice is still thin and the light still reaches. The surface of Avatar is the part you could explain to someone in a single quiet breath. There is a world divided into 4 peoples, each tied to one of the 4 elements. There is the Water Tribe, split between a North Pole and a South Pole. There is the sprawling Earth Kingdom, the largest of them all. There is the Fire Nation, an island empire with a long memory and a longer ambition. And there were the Air Nomads, a scattered people of monks who lived in temples perched on mountaintops and cared, more than anything, for freedom and for detachment. Some people in this world can bend, which is to say they can move and shape their native element with their bodies. Water pulled from the sea, stone lifted from the ground, fire breathed out through the fists, air spun into a wheel under the feet. And in every generation, exactly one person can bend all 4. That person is the Avatar, and the Avatar is the same soul, reborn again and again down the centuries, whose job is to keep the 4 nations in some kind of balance and to stand as a bridge between the human world and the world of spirits. That is the shape of it, and even that shape has a rhythm hidden inside it because the Avatar is not reborn at random. The soul moves through the nations in a fixed cycle in the same order the very first Avatar learned the elements, and that order is fire, then air, then water, then earth, and then around again. It is tied to the turning of the seasons, and it is the reason that when one Avatar dies, the world already knows in a general way where to go looking for the next. Aang, the boy in the ice, is an Air Nomad, so the Avatar born after him will come from the Water Tribe, which is why, much later, a girl named Korra from the Southern Water Tribe is the one who inherits the role. The cycle is one of those pieces of world building that feels like set dressing the first time you meet it, and then slowly, over the course of the whole franchise, turns out to be load-bearing, the thing entire tragedies are built on top of. But we are still near the surface, so hold that thought. The story proper begins because the Avatar has been missing for 100 years. In this world, that is a catastrophe with a body count. Because the Fire Nation, under a Fire Lord named Sozin, launched a war of conquest against the other 3 nations, and there was no Avatar to stop it. That war is the 100-Year War, and it is the weather system the entire original series lives inside. When Katara and her brother Sokka, 2 teenagers of the Southern Water Tribe, crack open that glowing iceberg near the South Pole, the boy who tumbles out is Aang, and he is not just any airbender. He is the Avatar the world has been missing, and he is a child, and the war he slept through has been grinding on without him for a full century. Here's the first thing that sits under the surface even of this, the part that the cheerful opening credits do not quite prepare you for. Aang was frozen for 100 years, but he is, biologically, 12 years old. He went into that ice a boy, and he comes out of it still a boy, having skipped the entire war, having skipped the deaths of everyone he ever knew. The show is, on its surface, a children's adventure with a flying bison and a lemur and a running joke about a man and his cabbages, and underneath that surface, from the very first episode, it is the story of the sole survivor of a genocide waking up a century too late to have stopped it. That gap between the brightness of the surface and the grief underneath is the whole reason a show that aired on Nickelodeon for children still gets talked about like this, and it is the reason a video like this one can even exist. So let's keep going down. 2 more things live up here in the thin ice because they are the kind of fact a newer fan collects first. One is Sozin's Comet, the great red streak that crosses the sky roughly once every 100 years, and while it is overhead, amplifies firebending to a terrifying degree. Fire Lord Sozin used its last passing to power the opening move of his war, and by the time Aang is awake, the comet is due to return, and the current Fire Lord intends to use it to finish what his great-grandfather started. The entire original series is, in a sense, a countdown to that comet, a ticking clock disguised as a road trip. The other thing up here is smaller, and it is the Cabbage Merchant, a nameless man whose produce cart is destroyed over and over across the series, whose despairing cry of "my cabbages" became one of the show's earliest and most enduring jokes. He debuts in an early Book 1 episode set in the city of Omashu. He is voiced by James Tsai, and he is the closest thing the series has to a mascot for its own sense of humor. The reminder that even a show about a 100-year war knew when to let a man lose his vegetables for the 10th time. And one last piece of surface ice before we sink, because it is the kind of thing people are almost surprised to learn. The group at the center of the show, Aang and Katara and Sokka, and eventually Toph, is affectionately called the Gaang by the fandom, a pun on Gaang and Aang, and it feels so natural that people assume it is official. It is not. The show never calls them that. It is a fan coinage, one of 1,000 small ways the audience filled in the language the writers left blank. And it is a nice little marker of where the surface actually ends, at the exact line where what the show says stops and what the fans decided starts. We are about to cross that line a lot tonight, and I will try every single time to tell you which side of it we are standing on, because that is the honest problem with a video like this. Avatar is not one text. It is 3 seasons of the original series, then a whole sequel series set 70 years later, then a shelf of graphic novels that are treated as canon, then a run of prose novels that fill in the deep past, and then, orbiting all of it, decades of interviews and creator comments and fan theories that range from the obviously true to the beautifully invented. As we go deeper, the ice gets colder and the sources get stranger, and it matters more and more that we keep them straight. So when something simply happens in the show, I will say so plainly. When it is a reading, an argument about what something means, I will mark it as a reading. And when it is a theory, something the fans built that the show never confirmed, I will say that out loud every time. Because down at the bottom of this iceberg, the difference between those 3 things is the only thing keeping us honest. Let's go a little deeper. The next layer down is the one the fans live in, the stuff you learn once you have watched the show twice and started reading around the edges of it. It is where the bending stops being a single trick and starts being a whole discipline with rules, and where the villains stop being obstacles and start being people. This is the layer where you learn that most people who bend can only bend one element in one fairly plain way, and that the extraordinary benders, the ones who become legends, are the ones who found a second thing hidden inside the first. The clearest example, and the one everybody reaches for, is metalbending. And this is a place I want to be careful, because it is a detail people get wrong constantly. Metalbending is invented by Toph Beifong, the blind, earthbending prodigy who joins the group in Book 2. And she does not invent it in the back of a Fire Nation cart, which is a version of the story that floats around and is simply false. She invents it while imprisoned, locked inside a metal box, a cage, by 2 bounty hunters named Xin Fu and Master Yu, who have been hired by her own father, Lao Beifong, to drag her back home to her family. Trapped in that metal container, blind and furious, she works out the thing no earthbender in history had managed. She feels through the metal the tiny impurities of earth still trapped inside it, the bits of crude ore that were never fully refined away. And she bends those, and through them she bends the metal itself. That is the actual mechanic, and it is beautifully specific. Metal is not its own element. Metal is earth that has been purified but not perfectly, and Toph's seismic sense is precise enough to grip the leftover grit. It is also why, much later in the sequel series, there is a metal that cannot be bent at all. A highly purified platinum with almost none of those impurities left, and armies get built around that single loophole. But that is a story for a deeper layer. For now, hold on to the truth of it. Toph, alone in a cage, out of pure stubbornness, changed what earthbending was forever. Lightning belongs to this layer too, and it is more tangled than people remember. Generating lightning is one of the rarest things a firebender can do. And in the original series, only 3 characters are ever shown doing it, and they are Azula, Ozai, and Iroh. It is not a matter of raw strength, it is a matter of inner stillness. The technique demands a kind of emotional clarity, a peace of mind, a separation of the positive and negative energies inside you, and if there is turmoil in the person attempting it, the lightning does not come, or it comes wrong and turns back on them. That is the reason Zuko, for most of the series, cannot generate it. His mind is at war with itself, and the lightning has nothing clean to travel along. What Zuko can do, and this is the part worth keeping straight, is redirect it. He can take a bolt fired at him and root it through his own body and out the other arm without letting it stop his heart. And that technique, lightning redirection, was not something Zuko discovered on his own. It was developed by his uncle Iroh, who worked it out by studying the way waterbenders move, the way they take an incoming force and turn it and send it somewhere else instead of meeting it head-on. Iroh reached across the wall between two nations' bending styles and borrowed an idea, and he taught it to his nephew, and it saves Zuko's life more than once. But notice the asymmetry the show keeps. Zuko redirects lightning again and again, and he is never once shown actually generating it himself, which is a small, deliberate reminder of exactly how far his own piece has and has not come. This is also the layer where you sort out Zuko himself, and where a common misreading needs correcting. People sometimes describe Zuko as starting the series a weak or mediocre firebender who slowly gets good. That is not what the show gives you. From very early on, Zuko is a capable, trained firebender, good enough to beat the ambitious Commander Zhao in a formal fire duel, and Agni Kai in Book 1. His problem was never a lack of skill. His problem is that he grew up in the shadow of his younger sister, Azula, who is a genuine prodigy, the kind of natural talent who produces fire in a cold blue and generates lightning as a teenager, and makes everything look effortless. Next to her, Zuko always looked like the disappointment, and his father made sure he felt it. So his arc is not really a training montage about getting stronger. It is about getting free of the idea that his worth was ever measured by how he compared to her. The firebending was mostly there the whole time. It was the piece that was missing, and the piece is what the whole long redemption is actually about. And redemption is the word because Zuko's turn is probably the single most admired character arc the show has, and it earns its place in this layer because it is what fans point at when they want to explain why the series is more than it looks. He begins as the exiled prince chasing the Avatar to restore his honor in his father's eyes, and he ends up abandoning the throne he was raised to want, joining the very group he spent 2 seasons hunting, and becoming Aang's firebending teacher and eventually the Fire Lord, who has to clean up 100 years of his own nation's crimes. The reason it lands, the reason people still write essays about it, is that it is slow and it is full of relapses. He gets close to good and then chooses wrong at the worst possible moment, deep under Ba Sing Se, and you have to sit through the consequences of that for a long stretch before he claws his way back. This is the part that gets me about Zuko, honestly, that the writers were patient enough to let him fail all the way down before they let him climb, because it means his eventual goodness reads as a decision he keeps making, and not a switch that flips. Around all of this stands one of the show's quietest and most satisfying secrets, the Order of the White Lotus. Through most of the series, you think Iroh is a wandering, tea-loving old man who happens to be wise, and then it is revealed that he is part of an ancient secret society that spans all 4 nations, a brotherhood devoted to philosophy and beauty and knowledge that crosses the very borders the war is being fought over. When the White Lotus finally assembles in the open, its members turn out to be a gathering of the masters you met along the way. Iroh is there. So is the mad old King Bumi of Omashu. So is Pakku, the stern waterbending master from the north. So is Piandao, the sword master who once trained Sokka. So is Zhongjong, the firebender who deserted the army rather than burn for it. The whole time you were watching a war between nations, there was a hidden order quietly agreeing that some things matter more than which flag you were born under. And when the moment comes, it is the White Lotus, not any army, that liberates the great city of Ba Sing Se. It is a lovely idea, an old and gentle counterweight to the war, and it is the kind of thing the show trusts you to have been paying attention to. King Bumi deserves his own beat here because he is one of those characters who is a joke and then suddenly is not. He is introduced as a cackling, apparently senile old king who forces Aang through a series of ridiculous tests. And only later do you learn that he is Aang's oldest friend, a boy Aang knew 100 years earlier, now impossibly old, who has been playing a very long game. Bumi is one of the most powerful earthbenders alive, able to bend with his face when his hands are chained, and he liberates his own city almost single-handedly when the comet gives him the opening he has been patiently waiting most of a lifetime for. He is the show's argument that waiting is a kind of strength, that the mad old man at the edge of the story might be the most disciplined person in it. This layer is also full of the smaller legends, the one-episode figures who lodge in the memory. There is June, the bounty hunter who rides a great eyeless beast called a Shirshu named Nyla, that tracks anyone by scent alone and can paralyze a person with a single lash of its tongue. There is Combustion Man, the silent assassin Zuko hires late in the series, who fires explosive beams from a tattooed third eye on his forehead. And here is the fan favorite detail: he has no name. The show never gives him one. Combustion Man is a fan nickname, and the closest the series comes is Sokka jokingly calling him Sparky Boom Man. And that is it. That is all we ever get for a character who tries to kill the heroes multiple times. He dies when his own weapon backfires. After Sokka's boomerang strikes that third eye and disrupts the chi flow so that his next blast detonates on himself. And there is, at the other end of the fandom's affection, the Great Divide. The Book 1 episode about a canyon and two feuding tribes that has a long-standing reputation as the weakest, most skippable episode the show ever made. A reputation the creators themselves have gently joked about over the years. It is fan-known in the way a shared eye roll is fan-known, and it is proof that even a series this beloved has one installment everyone quietly agrees to forget. Before we go deeper, one more thing lives at this layer, and it is the great civil war of the fandom rather than of the plot, the shipping war. For years, fans argued, sometimes fiercely, over who Katara should end up with. And the two camps were Kataang, Katara, and Aang, and Zutara, Katara, and Zuko. Kataang is canon. The show pairs Katara with Aang, and that is simply how it ends. But the argument outlived the show for a reason, and part of the reason is a real production detail that one of the show's head writers, Aaron Hash, is reported to have favored the Zuko pairing back in the writer's room. So the road not taken was, at least for a while, a road someone with real influence wanted to take. And that is why an argument about a children's cartoon romance still carries heat 2 decades later. It is the last warm thing at this depth. Below here, the water gets darker and older, and the show stops being about who bends what and starts being about where any of this came from in the first place. Because here is a question the surface never asks. Where did bending come from at all? How did the first waterbender know that water would answer her? The original series answers this quietly, almost in passing, and the answer is one of the most beautiful pieces of world building in the whole thing, because each of the 4 arts was learned, not invented, and learned from something older and stranger than any human. People did not think up bending. They watched teachers who were not people, and they copied. Waterbending came from the moon. That is the answer, and it is the only one of the 4 that was not learned from an animal. The first waterbenders watched the moon push and pull the tides, watched the sea rise and fall in answer to a light in the sky, and they understood that the water was being moved, and they learned to move it the same way. The moon is called the original waterbender, and that idea is not just poetry, it is mechanical, because in this world the moon is a spirit. In an oasis at the North Pole live 2 koi fish who circle each other endlessly, one white and one black, and they are Tui and La. The moon spirit and the ocean spirit push and pull, and they have taken physical form, and they are, in a real sense, the source of the entire waterbending art, which means that waterbending has a terrifying weakness the other arts do not. If you could kill the moon spirit, you could switch off waterbending itself, everywhere, all at once. Hold that, because it is going to come back, and when it comes back, it is going to hurt. Earthbending came from the badger moles, enormous blind creatures that live underground and move the earth around themselves without eyes, feeling the world entirely through vibration. The first humans to learn from them were 2 lovers, Oma and Shu, from opposite warring villages, who met in secret and learned from the badger moles so they could build tunnels to reach each other. It is the origin of earthbending, and it is a doomed love story at the same time. And it is also, if you are paying attention, the direct ancestor of everything Toph does, because Toph is blind, and Toph learned earthbending from the badger moles too. And Toph's whole way of seeing the world through the ground is the badger mole's way, not the human way. She is the most badger mole of all the earthbenders, which is exactly why she was the one who could feel the impurities in metal. Firebending came from the dragons, and the first humans to learn it were an ancient civilization called the Sun Warriors, who did not take fire from the dragons by force, but were given it, taught it as a discipline about life and energy rather than destruction. Over the centuries, the Fire Nation forgot that. It came to believe that firebending was fueled by rage and hate, that anger made the fire hotter, and it hunted the dragons nearly to extinction, partly for glory, because slaying a dragon was the highest honor a firebender could claim. And this is where one of the show's best-kept secrets sits, because Iroh, Zuko's uncle, carries the title of the man who killed the last dragon. That is his legend. It is how he earned the name the Dragon of the West. And it is a lie. Iroh did not kill the last dragon. When Iroh found the last two dragons, Ran and Shaw, they judged him worthy and taught him the true meaning of the fire. And Iroh chose to protect them by telling the world he had slain them so that no other hunter would ever come looking. He gave up his own honor publicly to keep two of the last magical creatures on the planet alive in secret. And when Zuko and Aang eventually find their way to the Sun Warriors and stand before those same two dragons and are judged in turn, they learn the original truth that firebending was never about anger, it was about energy and life and the sun. And they learn an old dancing form that the Fire Nation had reduced to a meaningless set of steps. The Dancing Dragon, it is called, and it is a small, perfect example of the show's method, taking a thing everyone treats as decoration and revealing that it was a memory of something sacred all along. And airbending, the art of Aang's own people, came from the sky bison, the great six-legged flying creatures of which Appa is one. The bison were the first airbenders, and the arrow tattoos that airbending masters wear, the arrows on Aang's head and hands and feet, are copied directly from the natural arrow markings on the sky bison's fur. When you see that blue arrow on Aang's forehead, you are looking at a human tribute to the animal that taught his people to fly. There is something quietly devastating in that once you know it, because the sky bison were very nearly wiped out alongside the Air Nomads, which means the arrow on Aang's head is a memorial to two endangered species at once, his own and the animals that made his people what they were. So that is the shape of the third layer. 4 arts, 4 teachers, none of them human, and a world where all magic is really a form of paying attention to something older than you. But if bending was learned from the moon and the dragons and the badger moles and the bison, then where does the avatar come from? The avatar bends all 4. No animal taught anyone to do that. And the answer to that question takes us down past the founding of any nation, past the war, past almost everything, to a man named Wan and a spirit named Raava. And it is here that the sequel series, The Legend of Korra, reaches back 10,000 years and rewrites the floor of the entire world. In the beginning, as the sequel tells it, humans and spirits did not live in separate worlds. They lived tangled together, and it was dangerous. And the humans survived by living on the backs and shells of enormous ancient creatures called lion turtles, city-sized beasts that carried whole settlements of people on their bodies and protected them from the wilds. And here's the part that quietly dismantles everything you assumed. In that age, humans could not bend at all. Bending was not a human trait. When a person needed to leave the safety of the lion turtle and venture into the dangerous spirit wilds to gather food, the lion turtle would grant them the power of an element, temporarily for the length of the journey, using a technique that reaches into a person's own life energy. And when the person returned to the city, they gave the power back. Bending was alone. It was not who you were. It was a tool handed out at the gate and returned at the gate. And this matters because people sometimes misremember it as the lion turtle granting fire for a single night, and that is not it. It was granted for the trip, however long the trip took, and surrendered before you came home. The man who broke that arrangement was Wan. Wan tricked his lion turtle into letting him keep his fire, was banished from the city for it, and out in the wilds, alone, he did something no human had done. He kept the fire. He learned to live with it. And in his wandering, he stumbled into the middle of the oldest conflict there is, the struggle between two spirits, Raava, the spirit of light and peace and order, and Vaatu, the spirit of darkness and chaos. They had been locked in their eternal battle for longer than anyone can count, trading the upper hand back and forth across the ages, and Wan, trying to help, accidentally freed Vaatu at the worst possible moment and threw the whole world toward darkness. To fix what he had done, Wan and Raava traveled together, and Wan learned all 4 elements from their original sources, and at last, at a rare cosmic event called harmonic convergence, when the planets aligned and the spirit portals opened, Wan and Raava did something permanent. They fused, not for a battle, not for a night, but forever. Raava's spirit bound into Wan's body, and together they defeated Vaatu and locked him away. And in that moment, Wan became the first avatar, the first human ever to carry all 4 elements and a great spirit at once, the bridge between worlds. I want to be careful here because the way Wan's story ends gets told wrong a lot. Wan did not die young and exhausted after a short, bright life. He lived a very long time, well over a century, and he spent those long years trying and largely failing to keep the peace between humans who kept finding new reasons to fight. And when he finally died, he died an old man, in the aftermath of a battle, not swinging in the middle of one, lying down, already going, with Raava beside him. He apologized to her. He said he was sorry he had not managed to bring the lasting peace he wanted. And it was Raava who made the promise, not Wan. Raava who told him that they would be together through all of his lives to come, that she would be there in every future avatar, down all the centuries forever. That is the origin of the avatar cycle. It is a promise a spirit made to a dying man who thought he had failed. Every avatar after Wan, all the way down to Aang and to Korra, is Raava keeping that promise. When you sit with that, the whole franchise tilts a little because it means the avatar is not a job or an office. It is a spirit, honoring the last words she said to the first person she ever loved. And that is also where the deepest existential rule of the whole world comes from. The one the surface never tells you, because if Raava can be bound into a human, Raava can be torn back out. If the avatar dies while fully in the avatar state, with Raava fully exposed and channeled, the bond can be broken and the cycle can end. Not pause, end, no next avatar, ever. The most powerful being in the world is, at exactly the moment of their greatest power, also the most fragile thing in it. One clean strike away from erasing every future life at once. This is not a fan theory. This is the load-bearing rule the writers built the tensest moments of both series on top of, and we will watch them nearly pull the trigger on it twice before we are done tonight. One more thing lives in this deeper canon, and it is smaller and more personal, and it is the reason Aang himself spends so much of the original series unable to reach the avatar state on purpose. There is an old spiritual framework the show borrows, the idea of the chakras, energy centers running up the body, each one blocked by a specific fear or attachment, each one needing to be opened in turn to let energy flow freely. Aang is guided through opening them by a guru, and he moves up through them, letting go of grief and guilt and shame one at a time, until he reaches the last one, and the last one asks him to let go of his earthly attachment, to release the person he loves most, which for Aang is Katara. And Aang cannot do it. He will not give her up, not even to reach the full cosmic power that would let him win the war more easily. He chooses the person over the power. The show does not entirely tell you whether that was wrong. It just lets it sit there, the avatar choosing love over transcendence, and then it makes him pay for it almost immediately, which brings us at last to the darker water, where the show stops teaching you how the world works and starts showing you what it costs. Let's start with the thing at the very foundation of the whole story, the thing the cheerful surface is built directly on top of, which is a genocide. The Air Nomads were not defeated in the war. They were exterminated before it. When Sazan's comet passed the first time, Fire Lord Sazan used the enormous power it lends to firebending to strike all 4 air temples at once and wipe out an entire people. And he did it for a cold, strategic reason. He knew that the next avatar in the cycle would be an airbender because the cycle was public knowledge. And so he tried to murder an entire culture in order to kill one child who might grow up to stop him. This is the part the show handles with real care, and it is the part I want to get exactly right, because it is easy to tell it wrong. Aang did not see it happen. Aang was not there. Aang had fled the southern air temple before the comet came, run away on Appa in the night because the monks had told him he was the avatar and were planning to separate him from his guardian, and out over the ocean a storm caught him and he went, in his panic and drowning, into the avatar state, and it froze him and Appa in that iceberg. He went into the ice before Sazan's comet, before the attack. By fleeing, he survived. He did not witness the genocide of his people. He slept through it, and he learned about it 100 years later, and that is somehow worse, that he woke into a world where it was already ancient history to everyone but him. And the show makes him find out. In an early Book 1 episode, Aang returns to the Southern Air Temple, his home, expecting, in the way a child expects, that it will be as he left it. And it is empty. And he wanders it, and he refuses to understand, and then he finds the skeleton of Monk Gyatso, the man who raised him, the closest thing he had to a father. And around Gyatso's bones are the remains of Fire Nation soldiers, many of them because Gyatso did not die easily. Gyatso fought off wave after wave of comet-powered firebenders before he fell. Aang finds the man who loved him most as a pile of old bones on the floor of an abandoned temple. And he breaks and he goes into the avatar state out of pure grief. And I want to be precise about one thing here, because it matters. Aang is not alone in that moment. Katara is with him. She reaches him. When the raw cosmic power of the avatar state is roaring out of a grieving 12-year-old, it is a water tribe girl he met 2 days ago who walks into it and puts her arms around him and brings him back. The show is telling you in its very first temple that the answer to catastrophic grief is not power. It is another person refusing to leave. The original series is full of these, dark rooms tucked behind bright hallways, and the darkest of them is probably Hama. Late in Book 3, the group meets a kindly old woman in a Fire Nation village who turns out to be the last of the Southern Water Tribe's original waterbenders, captured by the Fire Nation decades earlier when they systematically hunted down and imprisoned every waterbender in the South to make sure the South could never fight back. And in prison, cut off from the sea, Hama invented something monstrous out of desperation. She realized that there is water in all living things, in the blood, in the muscle, and that a waterbender, under a full moon when her power is at its height, could reach into that water and seize a living body and move it like a puppet. Bloodbending, it is called, and Hama used it to escape. And by the time the group meets her, she is using it to take revenge on the people of the Fire Nation, and she forces Katara to learn it, because Hama cannot bear to be the last person alive who knows how. And this is the trap I want to flag because it comes back later and changes. In the original series, bloodbending only works under the full moon when a waterbender is strongest. That rule is real in the original series. It will not stay true in the sequel, and when it stops being true, it becomes something even worse. But we are not there yet. Grief runs in Katara's own blood too, because there is the matter of her mother. In a Book 3 episode, Katara finally learns the identity of the man who killed her mother, a Fire Nation officer named Raava, who led a raid on the Southern Water Tribe years earlier, hunting for the last Southern waterbender. And the horror underneath it, the detail that makes it unbearable, is that Katara's mother, Kaya, was not a waterbender. When the raiders came looking for the last waterbender, and the last waterbender was actually the little girl Katara, Kaya lied. She told them that she was the one, that she was the last waterbender, to send them away from her daughter, and they took her and they killed her for it. Katara's mother died pretending to be her, to save her. And when Katara finally tracks Raava down, an old and pathetic man now, and has him at her mercy, she does not kill him. She looks at what he is, and she cannot do it, and the show does not frame that as weakness, and it does not frame it as easy forgiveness either. It just lets her walk away carrying it. This is the part that I find almost unbearably grown up for a children's cartoon, that it understood that not killing someone is not the same as forgiving them. There are older and stranger horrors than the human ones, though, and the strangest lives in the spirit world. His name is Ko, and he is called the Face Stealer, and he is one of the more genuinely frightening things the show ever put on screen, even though he never raises his voice. Ko is an ancient, centipede-like spirit who steals the face of anyone who shows any emotion in his presence. To survive an audience with Ko, you must keep your face perfectly blank. No fear, no surprise, no anger, nothing. Because the instant your expression moves, he takes it, and you're left faceless forever. And Ko's collection is a gallery of stolen faces, and one of them belonged to a woman named Ummi, who was the love of a past avatar, Avatar Kuruk. And Ko stole her face out of spite against the avatar and trapped her. And that loss broke Kuruk in a way we will come back to when we get to the very bottom of this. Ko is horror of a very particular kind, the kind where the danger is your own humanity, where feeling anything at all is the thing that destroys you. Then there is the conspiracy under the city, which is maybe the show's most sophisticated piece of darkness because it is political rather than magical. Ba Sing Se, the great walled capital of the Earth Kingdom, presents itself as the last safe place, an enormous city where the war cannot reach. And the reason it feels so safe is that the people running it have decided, at gunpoint, that the war simply does not exist inside the walls. There is a secret police force called the Dai Li, run by a bureaucrat named Long Feng, And their real job is not defending the city, it is controlling what the city is allowed to know. You are not permitted to mention the war in Ba Sing Se. And the people who cannot be made to stop mentioning it are taken beneath a lake, Lake Laogai, and brainwashed. That is the fate of Jet, the charismatic older boy from earlier in the series, dragged under and rebuilt into a docile citizen. And it is the origin of the tour guides called Judy, because Judy is not a person, it is a role, a smiling, blank-eyed woman assigned to visitors. And when one Judy is disposed of, another woman is brainwashed and given the same name and the same smile and sent out as if nothing happened. The trigger phrase they use to reset her is that the Earth King has invited you to Lake Laogai. It is one of the coldest ideas the show ever had. An entire population kept calm by a machine that quietly erases anyone who threatens the calm. And the show put it in the middle of a story about magic kids on a flying bison. Jet, since we are here, deserves a straight answer, because his ending is one of the show's few genuinely ambiguous moments, and people still argue about it. After he is unbrainwashed and helps the group, Jet is struck down by Long Feng in the underground chamber, and he is left there, badly wounded, and his friends say he will be fine, and the show cuts away. There is a grim little exchange about whether he is going to be all right, and the answer the creators have given, the honest answer, is no. Jet died. The show simply could not show a child's on-screen death that plainly on the network it was on, so it staged the scene so that a young viewer could believe he survived and an older viewer would understand that he did not. He is gone. The optimism was a mercy for the kids in the audience, not a fact. And then, further down book 3, there is The Painted Lady, which is a smaller story but a telling one, because it shows the war's cost on ordinary people rather than heroes. The group comes to a poor fishing village on a river, the Zhanghui, whose people are sick and starving. And the reason is a Fire Nation factory upstream pumping poison into the water, killing the fish and the people, and driving away the river's guardian spirit, the Painted Lady, who used to protect them. Katari, unable to walk past suffering, disguises herself as the Painted Lady and heals the villagers by night, and eventually the group destroys the factory. It is a quieter darkness than a genocide, but it is the same darkness scaled down. An empire that poisons a river full of poor people because the poor people do not matter to the war effort. And it is the show softly making sure you understand that the Fire Nation's evil was not only in its grand crimes, it was in the everyday ones, the ones with no villain's name attached, just a factory and a budget. All of these threads pull tight at the end of Book 2 in what is structurally the darkest single stretch of the original series, because it is the one time the heroes flatly lose. Azula, with Mai and Tai Li, infiltrates Ba Sing Se, turns the Dai Li against Long Feng, and seizes the city from the inside. And in the crystal caverns beneath it, in the moment when everything is falling apart, Aang tries to reach the Avatar state at last, tries to reach the power he refused to reach when it meant giving up Katara. And just as he opens himself to it, fully exposed, glowing, Azula fires a bolt of lightning into his back. And he falls. And here's the thing you now understand that you would not have understood 3 layers ago. Aang is struck down while entering the Avatar state. By every rule the world runs on, that should be the end. Not the end of Aang, the end of everything, the whole cycle, every future Avatar snuffed out in a cave under a city because Raava was exposed at exactly the wrong instant. He's only saved because Katara has on her person a small vial of spirit water from the North Pole Oasis, the single strongest healing water there is, and she pours everything she has into him and drags him back from a death that would have erased the future itself. The war's darkest hour is not a battle lost. It is the moment the audience realizes that the show has been holding a loaded gun the whole time, and it just very nearly went off. If that was the darkest hour for the heroes, the darkest arc for a villain belongs to Azula, and it is worth sitting with because the show does something with her at the end that a lesser show would never have risked. For 3 seasons, Azula is the truly frightening person in the story, not because she is the strongest, though she is close, but because she is perfectly controlled, a prodigy who never seems to feel fear or doubt, whose fire burns cold blue precisely because there is no heat of emotion behind it, only a clean and total will. And then, in the final stretch, that control comes apart, and the show makes you watch every crack. It starts small with her friends, Mai and Tai Li, the 2 girls who have followed Azula since childhood, turn on her, choosing love and mercy over fear. And Azula, who has ruled entirely through fear, has no idea what to do when fear stops working. She has never had a relationship that was not built on intimidation, and when the intimidation fails, she has nothing left, and she begins to unravel. By the time of her coronation, when she should be at the height of her power, about to be crowned Fire Lord, she is banishing servants for imagined betrayals, seeing her friends as traitors everywhere, and hallucinating her own mother in the mirror. Ursa, her mother, who left when Azula was young, who Azula believes never loved her, appears to her in the glass, and Azula talks to her, and the show gives her a line here that is one of the more subtly devastating things anyone says in the whole series, when she tells the Vision that her own mother thought she was a monster, and then adds, of course, that she was right, but that it still hurt. She was right, of course, but it still hurt. That is Azula understanding exactly what she is, agreeing with the verdict, and still being wounded by it, all in one breath. She smashes the mirror, and on the day of the comet, the day meant to be her triumph, she comes apart completely. And after the war, her brother Zuko has her institutionalized because there is nothing else left to do for her. The show does not redeem Azula. It does something harder and sadder. It shows you that the perfect, terrifying weapon was a frightened child the whole time, and that the person who made her that way was her own father. And it lets that be the end of her, unresolved, still hurting. And her father is where the finale finally goes. Fire Lord Ozai, on the comet's return, does not simply want to win the war. He plans to use the comet's power to burn the entire Earth Kingdom to the ground from a fleet of airships to erase it the way his great-grandfather erased the Air Nomads, and to declare himself the supreme ruler of a world reduced to ash. And Aang, the 12-year-old survivor of one genocide, is now the only person who can stop a second one, and the show hands him a moral problem it refuses to make easy. Everyone around Aang, all his teachers, tell him the same thing, that he is going to have to kill Ozai, that there is no other way, that a monster this size cannot be left alive. And Aang cannot accept it because Aang is an air nomad, raised by monks in a culture of pacifism and the sanctity of all life. And to him, killing Ozai would mean killing the last piece of who his murdered people were. He is genuinely stuck, torn between the only two things he cannot give up, his morality and the world. The way out arrives from the deepest layer of the world's own history, which is why it belongs here. On the night before the comet, Aang is carried away in his sleep and wakes on the back of an ancient lion turtle, one of the last of the very creatures that granted humans their first bending 10,000 years earlier. And the lion turtle teaches him the oldest technique there is, the one that predates the Avatar entirely, energy bending, the power to reach into a person's own life energy and reshape it. It is the same power the lion turtles once used to lend bending to non-benders and to take it back at the gate, and Aang uses it on Ozai. In their final confrontation, after he has subdued the deeply powerful firebender alive at the peak of the comet, Aang does not kill him. He bends Ozai's energy and he takes his firebending away permanently, leaving him alive but powerless, a defeated tyrant who can never threaten anyone again. It is the answer to the problem the whole season posed, and it is pure Avatar, a solution that refuses the false choice between his morality and the world by reaching for something older than both. Some fans find it a cheat, a power introduced at the last minute to spare the hero a hard choice. I understand the complaint, but I think it misreads what the show was doing, because the whole series had been almost imperceptibly building the idea that the oldest wisdom in this world is not about how to defeat your enemy. It is about how to spare them. And Aang taking the fire out of Ozai instead of the life is the thesis of the entire show made physical. He ends a 100-year war and he does not add one more body to it. That is the floor of the original series. Below it, the water changes, because below it, we leave the show entirely and go into the material that came after, the graphic novels and the sequel series, where the story kept going and the world got, if anything, even stranger and even sadder. And this is a line I want to cross slowly, because from here down, we are no longer only in the animated series that most people mean when they say Avatar. We are in the comics, which are canon, but which many viewers have never read, and in the Legend of Korra, which is a full sequel set decades later, and I will keep telling you which is which, because the difference matters more the deeper we go. The first thing waiting in the comics is the answer to a question the original series left deliberately open, which is what happened to Ursa, Zuko, and Azula's mother. In the show, she is a mystery, a woman who did something to protect Zuko and then vanished. And Zuko's final on-screen conversation with his father is him demanding to know where his mother is. The comics, in a trilogy called The Search, finally answer it, and the answer is one of the strangest things in the entire canon. Ursa, after she was banished, made her way back to her home village, a small place called Hiraa, and there she went to a spirit, the Mother of Faces, and she asked the spirit to take away her painful memories and to give her a new face, so that she could stop being the woman who had lost everything and simply start again. And the spirit did it. Ursa was given a new face, and her memories were erased, including her memories of her own children, and under a new name, Noriko, she built a whole new life. She married a kind man named Norin and had a daughter named Kie and lived calmly, with no idea that she had ever been a Fire Nation princess or a mother of two. And there is a final turn to it, because Norin, the man she married in her new life, turns out to be Ikem, her original true love from before her political marriage into the royal family, who had also had his face changed. Two people who loved each other, both wearing faces that were not their own, finding each other again without knowing why. At the end of the search, Zuko finds her, and her original face and her memories are restored, and she has to hold all at once both lives, the one she chose to forget and the children she forgot. It is a resolution, and it is a fresh grief in the same moment. While we are here in the naming of the Fire Nation family, let me clear up something the internet gets wrong constantly, because it is exactly the kind of thing that ends up stated as fact in videos like this one, and it is not. The mother of Iroh and Ozai, the wife of Fire Lord Azula, Zuko and Azula's grandmother, is unnamed in canon. You will see the name Ila attached to her all over the place, on wikis and in articles, and it is not canon. It comes from the fan-made corner of the wiki, the fandom namespace, and it leaked out and got repeated until people forgot it was invented. The real answer is that she does not have a name in any official material. It is a small thing, but it is exactly the sort of confident, invented detail that this kind of video is supposed to resist. So I'm telling you plainly, we do not know her name, and anyone who tells you it is Isla is passing along a fan's guess, as though the creators had signed off on it. The comics also do something quieter and more important than answering old mysteries, which is that they plant the seed of the entire future. The first canon trilogy, The Promise, deals with the mess left after the war, because when a nation has spent 100 years colonizing another one, you cannot simply undo it by declaring the war over. There are Fire Nation colonies that have stood for generations, full of people who were born there, where Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom families have intermarried and built lives that do not sort neatly back into two nations. Aang, young and idealistic, launches something called the Harmony Restoration Movement to remove the colonies and give the land back. And it brings him into direct conflict with Zuko, now the young Fire Lord, because one particular colony, a place called Yudao, has become something genuinely new, a mixed society where the old categories no longer describe anyone. And the argument the comic makes slowly is that you cannot unmix people, that the future is not going to be four pure nations kept carefully apart. It is going to be places like Yudao, where everyone lives together. That idea, that mixed colonial city that refuses to be sorted, is the direct ancestor of Republic City, the great metropolis that Aang and Zuko go on to found together, a shared home for all four nations, and Republic City is where the entire sequel series takes place. So the seed of Korra's whole world is planted in a comic about a real estate dispute, which is a very Avatar way for a world to be born. The bridge between the two series is worth walking slowly, because a lot happens in the 70 years between them, and most of it is only sketched. Aang and Katara marry and have 3 children, and the show is careful and interesting about them. Bumi, named for the old king, is born a non-bender in a family of the singularly powerful benders alive, and he has to make a life in the shadow of that. Kaya is a waterbender like her mother, and Tenzin is an airbender, the only one of Aang's children to inherit airbending, which makes him, for a long stretch, one of only a handful of airbenders in the entire world, and the sole keeper of his father's dead culture. Sokka lived on into old age and served as a statesman, chairing the council that governed the young United Republic, and in that role he helped sentence a crime boss named Yakone, which is a name to hold on to because it is about to matter enormously. Sokka died before the sequel series begins, and here I have to be honest about the limits of the canon because exactly how and when Sokka died is not established anywhere official, and the final status of him and Suki is left unconfirmed. So anyone who tells you the details of Sokka's death with confidence is filling a blank the creators left empty. And Toph, the girl who invented metalbending in a cage, grew up to found the metalbending police force of Republic City and to serve as its first chief, taking the thing she discovered out of pure spite and turning it into the backbone of a city's law. Her daughters, Lin and Suyin, half-sisters with different fathers, carry the Beifong line into the sequel. And then there is Korra and the sequel series, and I want to say clearly before we go into it that The Legend of Korra is where the franchise goes to its darkest and most adult places, because it was made for an audience that had grown up alongside the original show, and it does not flinch. Korra is Aang's reincarnation, a water tribe girl from the south, and she is almost the opposite of Aang in temperament, brash and physical and confident where he was gentle and evasive. And the series is about the world Aang built starting to come apart under pressures he never anticipated. And its first villain is the first great payoff of something we planted layers ago. His name is Amon, and he leads a movement of non-benders called the Equalists, who are furious at a world where the people born with bending hold all the power. And Amon's terrifying promise is that he can take a person's bending away permanently, by touch, cleanly, and he claims he does it through spirit power, that he has been chosen to rid the world of bending. And people believe him because they watch him do it, watch him press his thumb to a bender's forehead and leave them ordinary forever. But it is a lie about the method, and the truth is the darkest thing in the series so far. Amon is a bloodbender. His real name is Noatak, and he is the son of Yakone, the crime boss Sokka helped convict. And Yakone was a bloodbender of a very rare and specific kind. And this is where the rule we set down earlier finally breaks. In the original series, bloodbending only worked under the full moon. Yakone and his two sons, Noatak and Tarlok, could do it any time, day or night, no moon required, because they were born with a rare gift that removed the one limit that had always made bloodbending survivable. Yakone forced both of his sons to learn it as children, drilling them in the cruelest bending art there is, grooming them for a revenge on the Avatar he never got to take himself. Tarlok became a politician. Noatak became Amon, hid his own bending completely, and used the strikingly intimate and horrifying technique in the world, the seizing of a person's own blood, to reach into their body and shut off their bending at the source, all while telling the public it was the gift of the spirits. The scariest villain in the sequel is not scary because he is powerful. He is scary because he is a bloodbender who never needs the moon and who has convinced the world he is a holy man. And because underneath it all, he is another son destroyed by another monstrous father, which is a pattern this franchise returns to again and again. The child made into a weapon by the parent who is supposed to protect him. Removing bending, by the way, is not permanent in the way Amon claims, because the one power that can restore it is energy bending, the same lion turtle art Aang used on Ozai. And a past life of Aang teaches it to Korra so she can undo what Amon did, the oldest technique in the world, unobtrusively reaching forward across two series to answer the newest horror. But the deepest wound in the sequel, the one that reaches all the way down to the bottom of everything we have talked about tonight, comes in the second book, and it involves Korra's own uncle, a man named Unalak, and the return of a name from 10,000 years ago. Unalak, obsessed with the spirit world, manipulates Korra and the world toward a specific goal: the next harmonic convergence, the rare cosmic alignment that only happens once every 10,000 years, the same kind of event at which Wan first merged with Raava. And at this convergence, Unalak frees Vatu, the dark spirit Wan imprisoned, and merges with him, becoming a dark avatar, the exact mirror image of everything the avatar is supposed to be. And in the battle that follows, Vatu does the unthinkable. He reaches into Korra and he tears Raava out of her. Raava, the light spirit who has been bound into every avatar since Wan, the spirit whose promise to a dying man created the whole cycle, and he destroys her, crushes her out of existence in front of Korra. And in that instant, the thing we set down as the world's deepest rule comes true in the worst possible way. Because with Raava destroyed, Korra's connection to every single past avatar is severed, not blocked, not clouded, gone. Aang, Roku, Kyoshi, Kuruk, Yangchen, Wan, all of them, every past life stretching back 10,000 years, the entire accumulated memory and wisdom of the avatar cut off forever. Korra manages to win the fight, and Raava, it turns out, can regrow, can be reborn from the light, and she and Korra re-merge and the cycle continues from Korra forward. But the past lives do not come back. That is the part people do not always register. Even after Raava returns, the link to everyone who came before is permanently broken. Korra is the first avatar in 10,000 years who cannot talk to her predecessors, who has to face everything that comes next with no ancestors to consult, alone in a way no avatar has ever been alone. She is, in a real sense, a new first avatar, the start of a fresh line, and she has to earn her wisdom the hard way, from scratch, because the 10,000 years behind her went silent all at once. It is the boldest thing either series ever did, and it is why if you ever see a video claiming Korra chats with Aang after this point, you know it did not do its homework, because that door is closed and it stays closed. There is one bright thing that comes out of that same catastrophe, and it is worth naming before we go deeper into the dark. The chaos of that harmonic convergence, with the spirit portals torn open, has a side effect no one predicted. All over the world, ordinary non-benders suddenly find themselves able to airbend spontaneously for the first time in their lives. The Air Nation, the people Sozin tried to erase from the world a century and a half earlier, the people whose last child slept in an iceberg while they were murdered, comes back. New airbenders, born from nothing, appear across all four nations, and Tenzin, who had spent his whole life as one of the last keepers of a dead culture, suddenly has a people to rebuild. It does not undo the genocide. Nothing undoes a genocide. But it is the franchise reaching back across 170 years to give the airbenders a future, and after everything we walked through in the last layer, I find it really moving that the same event that took away Korra's past gave Aang's people back their tomorrow. The third book of the sequel is where a lot of people will tell you the whole franchise peaks, and it peaks because of its villains, a group of 4 called the Red Lotus, and their leader is the closest thing either series has to a philosopher with a knife. His name is Zahir, and he is an anarchist, a true believer who thinks the world's suffering comes from its order, from kings and governments and the Avatar herself, and that real freedom would only come if all of it were torn down. He is not wrong about everything, which is what makes him frightening, because he says true things about power and then follows them to a monstrous conclusion. And Zahir is himself one of the airbenders born new at the last harmonic convergence, which gives the show a chilling irony that the rebirth of Aang's gentle people also handed the art of air to a man who wants to dismantle civilization. His 3 companions are each a nightmare of a specific kind. There is Pili, who can fire explosive beams from a third eye on her forehead, the same rare and terrible combustion bending that Combustion Man had in the original series. There is Minghua, a woman born without arms who waterbends whole limbs of water into being and uses them as arms, and who is one of the truly creatively terrifying fighters the franchise ever animated. And there is Gazan, who can lava bend, melt solid rock into flowing lava with his hands, an ability that in the original series had only ever been shown in the hands of full avatars. What the Red Lotus do in that third book is escalate the darkness past anything the original series was allowed to show. Zahir, seeking to create chaos by removing rulers, corners the Earth Queen of Ba Sing Se, Ho Ting, and he kills her in a way that is truly hard to watch even knowing what she was, because he is an airbender. And instead of striking her, he bends the air out of her lungs, pulls it out and holds it away from her, and suffocates her to death using the gentlest element there is. Airbending, the art of the pacifist monks, the art of Aang, weaponized into murder by asphyxiation. And later, after the death of Pili, whom he loved, Zahir does something no airbender since the ancient past has managed. In his grief, letting go of his last earthly attachment, he achieves true flight, real unpowered flight, rising into the air with nothing holding him down, the first person in thousands of years to do it. His grief becomes wings. It is a beautiful and horrible thing to give a villain. And we will come back at the very bottom of tonight to the ancient man he learned it from. And then the Red Lotus point all of it at the deepest rule in the world, the one we have circled all night. They do not simply want to kill Korra. Killing an avatar is pointless. Because a dead avatar just reincarnates, the cycle rolls on. What Zahir wants is to end the cycle forever, to make sure no avatar ever comes again, and there is exactly one way to do that, which we established layers ago. You have to kill the avatar while she is in the avatar state, with Raava fully exposed, so that the spirit dies with the body. So the Red Lotus capture Korra and they poison her, forcing a metallic mercury poison into her body, because the agony and the threat to her life will force her into the avatar state involuntarily, and then, while she is glowing and exposed and helpless, they can kill her and snuff out the line for all time. It is the second time the franchise has loaded and cocked this exact gun, the first being Azula's lightning in the cave beneath Ba Sing Se. And this time it is even more deliberate, even more surgical. Korra survives, barely, because her friends break in, and because Suyin Beifeng, Toph's daughter, is a master metalbender who is able to bend most of the metallic poison back out of Korra's blood. But most is not all. Traces of the poison remain, and they leave Korra physically broken and worse, psychologically shattered. And the fourth and final book of the sequel does something almost unheard of for a show like this. It spends a large part of its final season on the Avatar's slow, halting, incomplete recovery from trauma, on Korra unable to fight, unable to enter the Avatar state, haunted by visions of her own poisoning, having to relearn how to be herself. It is one of the singularly honest depictions of trauma and recovery in any animated series, and it belongs on this layer because it is the show insisting that winning the fight does not mean you walk away whole. Korra wins and it costs her years. As for the Red Lotus themselves, their ends are grim across the board. Pili dies when Suyin metalbends Pili's own headpiece around her skull at the instant she fires, so that her own explosive blast detonates against her own head. Minghua dies when Mako, the firebender, electrocutes the water she is made of. Gazan, cornered and refusing capture, uses his own lava bending to bring a cavern down on himself, a suicide. And Zahir, the leader, the one who achieved flight, is the only one who survives, and he is captured and imprisoned, chained in a way that denies him the sky, kept alive in a hole in the ground, precisely because death would be a mercy and a martyrdom he does not deserve. While we are naming the franchise's prisons, there is one more, and it is the bleakest joke the sequel ever tells, because it reaches back and finishes off a character from the original series in a way almost no one expects. Deep in the spirit world, there is a place called the Fog of Lost Souls, a prison where the fog itself is a spirit that feeds on darkness and drives any human trapped in it slowly and completely insane, drowning them in their own worst memories until nothing of the person is left but the madness. And when the heroes pass through it, they find someone already there, someone who has been there, lost and raving for decades. It is Admiral Zhao. You remember Zhao from the original series? The ambitious Fire Nation commander who murdered the moon spirit at the North Pole, the man who killed the source of all waterbending in a fit of ego. When he did that, the ocean spirit, in its fury, rose up and dragged Zhao down into the spirit world, and everyone assumed he simply died. He did not. He has been trapped in the fog of lost souls ever since, for the better part of a lifetime gone completely mad, still ranting about his own greatness, still calling himself the Moonslayer, the Conqueror, unable to die and unable to leave. It is an honestly cruel fate, and the show delivers it almost as a throwaway, a face in the fog. And it is the kind of deep cut that rewards you for having watched the original series closely, a punishment that has been discreetly running in the background for 50 years of in-world time. The final villain of the whole animated saga is Kuvira, and she is the exceptionally modern of them because she is not a spirit or a bloodbender or an anarchist. She is a nationalist. After the Earth Queen's assassination throws the Earth Kingdom into chaos, Kuvira, a brilliant and ruthless military commander, steps into the vacuum and reunites the kingdom by force, rebranding it as the Earth Empire and herself as the Great Uniter. And she does it with the language every real-world authoritarian uses: order, strength, unity, the reclaiming of what is ours. And she builds a weapon, an enormous mecha, a metal giant many stories tall, armed with a cannon that fires a beam of concentrated spirit energy harvested from the vines that now grow through Republic City. And she marches it on the city to take it. The climax of the entire animated franchise is Korra fighting a skyscraper-sized robot with a spirit energy death ray, And when that weapon fires and misses and tears open the fabric between worlds, it rips a brand new spirit portal into existence in the middle of Republic City. And in the end, Korra does not defeat Kuvira by outfighting her. She follows her into the new spirit portal, and when Kuvira is at her most vulnerable, terrified, Korra chooses to show her mercy and understanding rather than force, recognizing in Kuvira's fear something like her own. And it is that, not a punch, that ends it. Kuvira surrenders. The last avatar we ever see on screen ends the last war we ever see by refusing to be the strongest person in the room, which is a straight line back to a 12-year-old boy taking the fire out of a tyrant instead of the life. And that new spirit portal, torn open in the heart of the city, is where the whole saga ends, on an image that the creators had to fight to make as clear as it is. In the final shot, Korra and Asami Sato, her closest companion through the whole series, step into the new spirit portal together, and they turn to face each other, and they take each other's hands, and the show ends. And there was a time, right after it aired, when people argued about whether that meant what it looked like it meant, and the answer from the creators themselves is yes. Brian Konietzko and Michael DiMartino both wrote publicly in the days after the finale, confirming that Korra and Asami are a couple, that the finale is a romantic ending, that Korrasami, as the fans call it, is canon. It was a clearly significant moment for an American animated series in 2014, a same-sex romantic ending on a children's network, and the creators were direct about the fact that the network's limits meant they could only take it as far as a held hand and a shared look, but that the intent was unambiguous, and that they stood behind it completely. So there is no theory to flag here, no maybe. The last thing the animated saga shows you is two women in love walking into a doorway between worlds, and the people who made it have told you, in plain words, exactly what you are looking at. That is the bottom of the animated canon. Everything below this point is deeper still, older, more obscure, drawn from the novels and the interviews and the fan-built corners of the world, and it is where we find the strangest and quietest facts of all, the ones even devoted fans sometimes have never heard. Let's begin the deep water with the avatars who came before Aang, because the surface of the show gives you 2 or 3 of them as wise, glowing advisors. And the truth is that most of them were troubled, compromised, sometimes frightening people. And the further you read into the expanded canon, the less any of them look like saints. Start with Roku, because he is the one the original series shows you most. Roku is the avatar right before Aang, a firebender, and here is the detail that turns his whole story tragic. Roku and Fire Lord Sozin, the man who started the war and ordered the genocide, were childhood best friends. They grew up together. They were as close as two boys can be, and their friendship broke slowly over years as Sozin's ambition curdled into a plan to expand the Fire Nation across the world, and Roku, as the Avatar, could not allow it. There is a moment earlier in their lives when Roku catches Sozin beginning his conquest and stops him, and could have ended him then, and chooses, out of their old friendship, to spare him, to let him live with a warning. And that mercy is repaid at the end of Roku's life in the coldest way imaginable. Roku lived on an island with an active volcano, and when the volcano finally erupted and threatened to kill him, Sozin came, flying in on his dragon, and for a moment it looks like the old friends will save each other one last time. And then, as Roku is overcome by the volcano's toxic gases, Sozin makes a calculation. He looks at his dying friend, the one being on Earth who could stop his war, and he leaves him there to suffocate and die, flies away, and lets the volcano finish him. Sozin murdered his best friend by abandonment, and it cleared the last obstacle to the war, and the next avatar in the cycle would be an airbender, which is the exact reason he then moved to wipe out the Air Nomads. The whole 100-year war traces back to one man choosing, in a cloud of volcanic gas, to let his oldest friend die. Before Roku, there was Kyoshi, and Kyoshi is where the deep canon really opens up, because she is the subject of 2 full novels, and she is, by a wide margin, the single strangest avatar in the record, starting with the simple fact that she lived to be 230 years old. 230. She is the oldest confirmed human being in the entire canon, and the novels tie that impossible lifespan to something called the immortal life technique, taught to her by an old assassin, a way of extending life far past its natural limit. She is also responsible for one of the especially misremembered facts in the fandom, so let me set it straight. Kyoshi created Kyoshi Island, the home of the Kyoshi warriors, by splitting a peninsula off from the mainland with a single act of earthbending so enormous it reshaped the coast. She did not create the Great Divide, the Big Canyon from that weakest episode we talked about earlier. Those are two completely different landmarks, and people conflate them constantly. And even the story of how Kyoshi Island was made is darker than the legend. The popular version is that Kyoshi personally struck down an invading warlord named Chin the Conqueror by splitting the earth. The truth, as the show itself lays out, is that Kyoshi refused to move from where she stood as Chin advanced, and used her power to separate her peninsula from the land. And Chin, too proud and too foolish to retreat, fell to his death as the ground gave way beneath him. She did not strike him down, she simply refused to yield and let his own stubbornness kill him. Her recorded philosophy, the line the show gives her, is that only justice will bring peace, and she is the hard counterweight to Aang's gentleness, an avatar who plainly believed some people had to die for the world to be safe, and who acted on it. And the novels, written by F.C. Yee as a series called The Chronicles of the Avatar, take that hardness and go somewhere actually disturbing with the world around her. They are canon, fully canon, and they are not written for small children, and the darkest figure in them is not even a villain in the ordinary sense. He is a man named Jianzhu, one of Kyoshi's guardians, a powerful and respected earthbender sage, and the novels reveal what he did to earn peace in his region. He earned the name the Gravedigger of Zulu Pass by burying an army of rebels, thousands of them, some 5,000 men, of a rebel group called the Yellownecks, alive in the earth, a mass grave made by bending, one of the remarkably horrifying acts in the whole franchise. And it is committed by one of the supposed good men. And there is more, because before Kyoshi was known to be the Avatar, this same Jianzhu had raised and trained a boy named Yun, believing Yun to be the Avatar, and when it turned out that Yun was not the Avatar and Kyoshi was, Jianzhu effectively sacrificed Yun, led him to a spirit called Father Glowworm, and let the boy be taken to clear the way. The Kyoshi novels are, at their core, about how Kyoshi becomes willing to kill, how a frightened servant girl grows into an avatar who will end a life when she judges it necessary, and she does. She hunts down and kills the bandit leader Shu Ping-an, and the books do not flinch from what that costs her soul. If the animated series is a story about a boy who refuses to kill, the Kyoshi novels are the story of the Avatar, who decided that refusal was a luxury the world could not always afford. And holding those two philosophies side by side is one of the richest things the whole franchise offers. Between Kyoshi and Roku, if you go back the other way, there was Kuruk, and Kuruk is the saddest of the recent avatars. And his story is a slow-motion tragedy that the animated series only hints at, and the Kyoshi novels finally explain. On the surface, Kuruk is remembered as a lazy avatar, a water tribe man who died young, around the age of 33, and who seemed to coast through his life without taking his duties seriously. That reputation is a lie he allowed to stand. The truth is that Kuruk spent his short life secretly hunting and battling dark and dangerous spirits, alone in the spirit world, night after night, a brutal and unending war that no one knew he was fighting. And it drained his life force year by year until it killed him before he was old. He wore the mask of a careless playboy to hide the fact that he was gently destroying himself, protecting a world that thought he was worthless. And the cruelest blow, the one we touched on much earlier when we met Ko the Face Stealer, is that the spirit Ko stole the face of Kuruk's betrothed, a woman named Umi, ripped her face away and trapped her in the spirit world forever as an act of revenge against the Avatar. And Kuruk could not save her. He lost the woman he loved to a face-stealing spirit, and then spent the rest of his short, misjudged life fighting the darkness that took her. Let me be exact about the sourcing here, because it is a known trap. Kuruk's dark backstory is revealed in the Kyoshi novels, The Rise and the Shadow of Kyoshi, not in the Yangchen novels. And it is worth getting right because it is exactly the kind of detail that gets attributed to the wrong book and then repeated everywhere. Which brings us to Yangchen, the airbender avatar before Kuruk, and to one of the more subtly subversive things the expanded canon ever did. In the animated series, Yangchen is spoken of with something close to reverence, remembered as one of the greatest and most spiritually gifted avatars who ever lived. a near-saintly figure, the airbender whose legacy was so beloved that a whole festival is held in her honor. And then F.C. Yi wrote 2 novels about her, The Dawn of Yang Chen and The Legacy of Yang Chen, and while I do not want to overstate the specifics, the clear thrust of those books is that the real Yang Chen was a far more morally complicated figure than her saintly reputation. A pragmatist who engaged in deception and espionage and hard political compromise, who bent and sometimes broke the pacifist ideals of her Air Nomad upbringing because she judged that the world needed an avatar who would get her hands dirty. The books argue, in effect, that the legend of the perfect spiritual Yang Chen was a kind of public relations, and that the woman underneath made choices her own people would have found troubling. And note the title, because this is a small trap the internet falls into. The 2023 novel is called The Legacy of Yang Chen, not The Legend of Yang Chen, and the 2 novels together form one of the more interesting statements the franchise has made, which is that even its most beloved, most sacred avatar was, up close, a politician making grim trades in the dark. There are older avatars still whose names we barely have. There was Sato, a Fire Nation avatar before Yang Chen, remembered as an extraordinarily dutiful administrator who served as Grand Advisor to a Fire Lord, and who was, notably, a lava bender, that rare fusion ability. And there are names in the record that are barely more than names, an avatar called Salai mentioned in passing in the Kyoshi novels, with no real details attached, a reminder that the cycle stretches back through thousands of years of people we will never really know, each one a full life lived carrying Raava's promise. Most of them lost to time, only the last handful ever given faces and stories. And that is really the feeling this layer leaves you with, that the glowing wise ancestors Aang consults are the tiny visible tip of an enormous submerged history, and that the closer you look at any of them, the more human and troubled and compromised they turn out to have been, all the way down. Now for the deep cuts about how the world itself works, the ones that subtly rewrite rules you thought were settled, and I want to start with the one this channel's own viewers have taught us to get right, because it is a beautiful correction. We said, back in the 3rd layer, that humanity first received bending from the lion turtles, who granted elements through energy bending, and that for a very long time the lion turtles were understood to be the only beings who could give the power of an element to a person born without it. That is the common understanding, and it is what most fans will tell you. But it is not the whole truth, and the correction comes from one of the truly obscure corners of the expanded canon. There was an avatar named Sonam, an airbender, from an era so distant it is called a golden age of the airbenders, roughly 5,000 years before the war. And Sonam crafted an object, a staff, an energy-bending staff, that could do what everyone thought only the lion turtles could do. It could grant bending to a non-bender. The first person recorded to receive airbending from Sonam's staff was a pupil named Taga. And what that single deep fact does is almost imperceptibly dismantle a load-bearing assumption, because it means the lion turtles were never the unique source of bending. There was at least one other way, a human-made way, an avatar who built a tool that could hand out an element. It is the kind of detail that sounds like a footnote and is actually a hole in the foundation. And it is exactly why I keep insisting all night that the confident version of a fact and the true version are so often not the same thing. Anyone who tells you flatly that only the lion turtles could ever grant bending has simply never heard of Sonam's staff. Then there is flight, real flight, and the ancient man I promised you when we watched Zahir rise into the air. When Zahir achieved true unpowered flight in the 3rd book of the sequel, he became the first person in something like 4,000 years to do it, and the person he was the first since is a figure named Guru Lagima, an ancient airbender, a monk and a poet from the deep past. Lagima achieved flight by letting go, completely, of every earthly attachment, of the body's need to be anchored to the ground, and the legend holds that in the last stretch of his life, some 40 years of it, Lagima never once touched the earth, that he lived entirely in the air. The words he left behind are the words Zahir meditates on, the instruction to let go your earthly tether, to enter the void, to empty yourself and become wind. And here is the quiet, unsettling thing about it. Lagima and Zahir are the only 2 airbenders in all of recorded history known to have achieved true flight, and one of them was an ancient enlightened monk, and the other was a murderer who suffocated a queen with air. The same technique, the same total spiritual detachment produced a saint and a killer, because letting go of all earthly attachment is a spiritually pure act, and it is also, if you think about it too hard, the exact mindset that lets a person feel nothing about tearing the world apart. The franchise never says that out loud. It just puts the two flying men in the record 4,000 years apart and leaves you to sit with the fact that transcendence and monstrousness can look identical from the outside. The spirit world is full of these deep cuts, ancient beings the show visits once and never fully explains, and two of them are worth pulling up from the dark. One is Wan Shu Tong, whose name means he who knows 10,000 things, a vast and ancient owl spirit, who is the keeper of a library, a great repository of all the knowledge in the world that once existed in the physical world buried in the desert. Wan Shu Tong hates humans because in his long experience, humans only ever come to knowledge to use it as a weapon, to gain an advantage over other humans, and when Team Avatar comes to his library and he catches them doing exactly that, using his knowledge to plan a military strike, he decides humanity has proven him right, one time too many. And he sinks the entire library back down into the sand and drags it into the spirit world, taking all that accumulated knowledge out of human reach, maybe forever. It is a small tragedy hidden inside an adventure episode, an ancient spirit giving up on us and taking the library with him. The other is a gentler, deep cut, and it involves Iroh because Iroh's story does not actually end in the original series. By the time of the sequel, Iroh has died in the physical world, and it is revealed that when he died, his spirit did not simply pass on. Iroh loved the spirit world so much and had grown so wise and so at peace that his soul chose to go and live there, permanently, running a little tea shop in the spirit world, exactly the life he always wanted, serving tea to spirits for eternity. And when Korra, lost and struggling in the spirit world, needs guidance, it is Iroh she finds there, the same warm old man pouring tea, still gently steering a troubled young person toward the light. Of all the fates the franchise hands its characters, Iroh's might be the kindest, a man who spent his life seeking peace and in death simply chose to keep the peace forever. And Zuko, since we have followed him all night, gets an old age worth mentioning because the sequel shows it to us. By the time of Korra, Zuko is an old man in his 80s, long retired from the throne, and he did not die a lonely emperor. He abdicated the crown and handed it to his daughter, Izumi, who is the reigning Fire Lord throughout the sequel era. And he spends his final chapter as a kind of wandering elder statesman traveling the world on the back of a dragon named Druk, which is its own quiet miracle when you remember that the whole world once believed the dragons were extinct, hunted to the last one, and that Iroh lied to protect the final two. By the sequel, dragons are back, and the former Fire Lord rides one across the sky. And that alone tells you the world got better in some ways, even as it got more complicated in others. I will flag one careful non-fact here because it is a place fans reach for certainty they do not have. Zuko has a daughter, Izumi, and Izumi has a son, but Zuko's wife, Izumi's mother, is never named or confirmed in the canon. Many fans assume it was Mai, his girlfriend from the original series, and the creators have specifically said that Mai is not confirmed to be Izumi's mother. So we simply do not know who Zuko married, and that blank, like the blank where his grandmother's name should be, is one the honest version of this story has to leave empty rather than fill with a guess. There is one more foundational, deep cut about the lion turtles themselves worth surfacing before we leave the lore, because it closes a loop. We met the lion turtles as the ancient benefactors who carried human cities and lent people the elements, and we met the last of them as the creature that taught Aang energy bending on the eve of the final battle. What sits between those 2 points is a quiet extinction. When the age of humans living on the lion turtles ended and Wan became the first avatar, the lion turtles collectively withdrew from the role they had played for so long. They declared, in effect, that they would no longer give humans the power of the elements, that humanity would have to carry bending itself now, and they retreated. And over the following ages they were hunted, killed for their power and their size, until they were believed gone entirely, which is why the one that finds Aang is described as one of the last of its kind, a survivor of a species that once held up whole civilizations, reduced to a single ancient creature drifting at the edge of the world with one last gift to give. When you line it up, the pattern is almost unbearable because it is the same pattern as the Air Nomads and the same pattern as the dragons, an ancient and gentle source of the world's magic, hunted to near nothing by the very people it gave that magic to. The franchise keeps telling one story in different costumes, the story of humanity nearly destroying the thing that made it and then being given one last undeserved chance to do better. Now we come up out of the fiction for a while because some of the deepest layers of this iceberg are not in Avatar's world at all. They are in the making of it, in the real people who built it. And the first of those facts is one that sits underneath the show in a way most fans never quite feel until they learn it. Iroh, the warm old uncle, the heart of the entire original series, the man whose voice you associate with tea and wisdom and forgiveness, was voiced by an actor named Mako Iwamatsu, known simply as Mako, a Japanese-American actor with a long and distinguished career. And Mako died. He died in the summer of 2006 of esophageal cancer at the age of 72, after recording his lines for the first 2 books of the show but before the 3rd could be finished. So the Iroh you hear in the final season is not entirely the same voice, because the role had to be recce'd with another actor, Greg Baldwin, who studied Mako's performance closely enough to carry it to the end. And if you have ever felt that something was subtly different about Iroh's voice in the last stretch of the series, you were not imagining it. You were hearing the seam where one man's work ended and another's began out of necessity, and the show grieved him inside itself. One of the supremely beloved single episodes of the entire series, a quiet, standalone chapter that follows Iroh through an ordinary day as he privately mourns his own dead son, was dedicated to Mako's memory, and it is almost unbearable to watch once you know that, because it is a story about a father grieving a lost child that doubles as a cast, and crew grieving a lost friend. And the franchise did one more thing to honor him. When the sequel series needed a name for one of its central characters, a firebender, they named him Mako, directly in honor of the man who gave Iroh his soul. So every time someone says the name Mako in the Legend of Korra, they are saying the name of the actor who made you love Iroh, kept alive inside the very world he helped build. Underneath the animation, there is another layer of realness that a lot of casual viewers never register, which is that the bending is not made up. The fighting styles are not invented martial arts drawn by animators guessing at how a punch should look. Every one of the 4 bending arts is based on a real, specific, distinct school of Chinese martial arts, chosen because its philosophy and movement matched the element, and the production hired a real martial arts consultant, a man known as Sifu Kisu, to make sure the benders move correctly. Airbending is based on Baguazhang, a style built on constant circular walking and evasion, never meeting force directly, which is exactly right for the pacifist air monks who dodge rather than strike. Waterbending is based on Tai Chi with its slow, flowing, redirecting movements, force turned aside rather than opposed. Earthbending is based on Hunga, a hard, rooted, immovable style planted firmly in stances like a mountain, which is why earthbenders always look like they are refusing to move. And firebending is based on Northern Shaolin with its long, aggressive, powerful strikes. And there is a beautiful exception, the kind of detail that tells you how much care went into this, because Toph, the blind earthbender, does not move like other earthbenders. Her style is based on a different art entirely, Chugar Southern Praying Mantis, a close, low style that relies on sensitivity and feeling an opponent's movements rather than seeing them, which is a perfect physical match for a blind girl who fights by feeling vibrations in the ground. They gave the blind prodigy her own martial art, one built on touch instead of sight, and they did it in a children's cartoon that most of the audience would never notice, and that is the level of craft we are talking about. The same is true of the writing that appears on screen. Every piece of text you see in Avatar's world, on signs, on scrolls, on banners, in Wan Shutong's library, is not a made-up fantasy alphabet. It is real, traditional Chinese calligraphy, actual Chinese characters written by a real calligraphy consultant, so that the words in Avatar's world are really readable to someone who reads Chinese. The show built its world out of real language and real martial traditions rather than inventing hollow substitutes. And that decision, more than any single plot point, is why the world feels as solid as it does, because so much of it is calmly, verifiably real underneath the fantasy. Then there are the deep production cuts, the alternate versions of the show that almost existed. Before the series aired, there was an unaired pilot made in 2003, and watching it now is like looking at a photograph of the show as an infant, before it grew into itself, because so many things are different. Aang was voiced by a different actor, Mitchell Musso, not the Zach Tyler Eisen who would voice him in the series. Katara was not even named Katara, she was called Kaya, a name that would later be given unobtrusively to her own mother and still later to one of her own children, so the original name did not vanish, it just migrated down the family tree. And most striking of all, Toph did not exist as we know her. In the earliest development, the character who would become Toph was conceived completely differently, imagined at one point as a large, muscular male earthbender, the opposite in nearly every way of the small blind girl we got. The creators reworked the character extensively before landing on Toph, and the version the world fell in love with, the tiny blind girl who is the strongest earthbender in the story, exists because someone looked at the obvious muscular strongman version and decided to do something far more interesting. And in that pilot, Iroh was not even Zuko's uncle. The family relationship that anchors the entire original series had not been invented yet. It is truly strange to think about that the singularly beloved relationship in the show, the exiled boy and the uncle who never gives up on him, was not part of the original plan, it was discovered along the way. While we are correcting the record on details fans get wrong, here is a small one that this channel has been called out on before, so let me state it precisely. The Ember Island Players, the theatrical troupe who performed that famous, brutally self-aware play near the end of the original series, the play that recaps and mocks the whole show while the heroes watch in horror from the audience, are not traveling performers. They are a resident troupe based at the Ember Island Theater in the Fire Nation, a permanent company at a specific theater, not a band of wandering artists moving from town to town. It is a tiny distinction, and it is exactly the kind of thing that is easy to get casually wrong and worth getting right, because precision is the whole point of a video like this. Their play, by the way, the one they perform, is a real in-world work with a named in-world playwright, and it is one of the singularly audacious things the show ever did. A full episode near the finale that consists largely of the characters watching a bad stage adaptation of their own adventures and being wounded by how it portrays them, the show reviewing itself in public, laughing at its own shipping wars and its own tropes, right before it goes into its deadly serious ending. And the last thing on this real-world layer is the recognition, because it is easy, watching a cartoon about magic children, to forget that it was taken seriously by the people whose job is to take things seriously. Avatar. The Last Airbender was created by Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko, the pair fans affectionately call Brike, and it ran on Nickelodeon across 3 seasons and 61 episodes between 2005 and 2008. And it won, among other honors, a Peabody Award, which is one of the especially prestigious awards in all of broadcasting, an award far more often given to serious journalism and landmark drama than to a children's action cartoon. And it won an Emmy for one of its darkest episodes, the one set beneath Lake Laogai where we learned what the Dai Li really do. And it won Annie Awards, the animation industry's own honors, more than once. This was not a show that was only appreciated in retrospect by grown-up fans on the internet. It was recognized while it aired as one of the best things on television in any category, and the distance between what it looked like from the outside, a kid's show about a bald boy who flies, and what it actually was, is the entire reason it is still worth making a 3-hour video about 18 years after it ended. Which brings us to the 2 times the world tried to remake it in live action, because both attempts are a layer of this iceberg all their own, and the first one is famous mostly for how badly it went. In 2010, the director M. Night Shyamalan made a live-action film adaptation of the first season, and it is, by almost universal agreement, one of the remarkably notorious failures ever made from beloved source material. It was condemned, above everything else, for whitewashing, for taking a story built lovingly and specifically out of Asian and indigenous cultures, and casting white actors in the central heroic roles while filling out the villains differently. An inversion that felt like a betrayal of the very thing that made the world feel real, the real martial arts and real calligraphy and real cultural care we just talked about. All of it hollowed out. The film swept the Razzies, the awards handed out mockingly for the worst films of the year, winning a fistful of them, including the dishonor of Worst Picture, and it is remembered now mainly as a cautionary tale. And there is one detail about it that fans find almost physically irritating, which is that the film deliberately changed the pronunciations of the characters' names. The name you had said in your head for years, Aang, with that flat, open sound, was pronounced differently in the film, given a different vowel, and other names were shifted the same way. And whatever the reasoning, the effect on longtime fans was to make the characters they loved sound subtly wrong in their own story. A small alienation layered on top of a large one. The kindest thing anyone tends to say about the film is that its failure made the eventual good version feel earned. The good version, or at least the sincere one, came 14 years later, in 2024, when Netflix released a live-action series adaptation, a first season of 8 episodes that premiered in late February of that year. And this one is a more complicated story than the film because it was not a cynical cash grab. It was made by people who clearly loved the source, and it was, by most measures, a real improvement on the movie, cast with Asian and indigenous actors in the roles that demanded them, taking the world seriously. But it carries its own deep and slightly sad production fact, which is that the 2 original creators, Di Martino and Konietzko, the men who made the whole thing, were initially involved in the Netflix series and then left it in 2020 over creative differences, walking away from the live-action version of their own life's work because they could not get it made the way they believed it needed to be made. The show went on without them, run by a different showrunner, Albert Kim, and so the Netflix series exists in a strange position, a honestly respectful adaptation that the actual creators declined to put their names to, which tells you something about how hard this world is to translate out of animation and into flesh. And because this channel cares about getting the details right, and because these are exactly the kinds of comparisons that get stated carelessly, let me correct 2 specific things about that Netflix adaptation that are easy to get wrong. The first concerns Master Pakku, the stern waterbending master at the North Pole, and the arc where Katara demands to be trained as a warrior in a culture that forbids women from learning combat waterbending. In the original cartoon, Katara challenges Pakku to a fight, and she loses, but during the duel, Pakku sees the necklace she wears and recognizes it, because it was carved by him long ago for the grandmother who fled the Northern Water Tribe rather than marry him. And that recognition, that sudden collision with his own lost past, is what melts his resolve and makes him agree to teach her. The Netflix version handles it differently, and people sometimes claim it kept the arc almost intact, and that is not accurate. Netflix has Katara lose the duel too, but it cuts that crucial necklace recognition scene, the emotional heart of the whole resolution, and instead Pakku only softens later, after watching the tribe's women waterbenders fight in the actual battle for the North, changing his mind about their capability rather than being undone by his own buried heartbreak. It is a meaningfully different beat, and flattening it into almost the same thing misses what the original scene was actually doing. The second correction is a favorite trap of these adaptation comparisons, and it concerns Azula, Mai, and Ty Lee, the trio of Fire Nation girls, because the Netflix series brings them in earlier than the cartoon did, and people often overstate the difference by claiming the trio simply does not exist in the first book of the cartoon at all. That is close to true, but not exactly true, and the exact truth is more interesting. Mai and Ty Lee clearly do not appear in the first book of the original series, but Azula does barely. Her official first appearance in the cartoon is a brief, silent, unnamed cameo in a first book episode, a flashback to an Agni Kai, where she stands as a small child beside the adults, not identified, not speaking, just present, a tiny seed planted long before she blooms into the main antagonist of the second book. So if someone tells you Azula is completely absent from the first season of the cartoon, they are almost right and technically wrong. And the technically is the whole game down here at this depth, because the difference between almost absent and one silent cameo is exactly the kind of thing this channel's viewers notice and rightly hold us to. There is a real tension worth sitting with underneath all of these adaptation attempts, and it is not really about anyone casting choice or cut scene. It is that Avatar might simply be a story that only fully works as animation. The bending, the sheer scale of it, cities lifted, oceans raised, a boy taking the fire out of a man's body, is native to a medium where anything can be drawn. And every time someone tries to pin it to real actors on a real set, some of the impossibility leaks out of it, and impossibility was always part of the point. The film failed for reasons of disrespect, and the Netflix series succeeded far more by taking the world seriously. But both of them are, in the end, wrestling with the same problem, which is that the original was not just a great story, it was a great story told in exactly the right form. And forms do not always survive translation. I'm not saying live-action Avatar cannot work. I am saying the thing people are really chasing when they remake it is not a story, it is a feeling. And feelings are the hardest thing in the world to adapt. Now we go back under the ice one more time, down to the coldest confirmed things. The moments the show got away with that, in hindsight, feel like it went further than a children's network should ever have let it go. And I promised you, layers ago, that we would come back to the moon, and here we are, because the night the moon died is one of the more devastating hours the original series ever aired. Remember the rule we set down. Waterbending comes from the moon, and the moon is a spirit, and that spirit lives at the North Pole as a white koi fish in a sacred oasis. And if the moon spirit dies, waterbending dies with it everywhere, all at once. At the climax of the first book, the ambitious Fire Nation commander Zhao lays siege to the Northern Water Tribe, and Zhao knows this rule, and he does the unthinkable. He finds the oasis, and he takes the white koi fish out of the water, holds it up, this small fish that is the physical body of the moon spirit, the source of an entire people's magic and an entire piece of the natural order, and he kills it. And the moment he does, the sky goes red, the moon vanishes, and every waterbender in the world, in the middle of the battle they were fighting, loses their power entirely, cut off from the source. Zhao murdered the moon. That is a sentence you can say about a Nickelodeon show, and it should stop you because it is plainly one of the darkest single acts in all of children's television, an act of cosmic vandalism, a man killing a piece of the sky to win a fight. And it does not end there because of Yue. Princess Yue of the Northern Water Tribe, a young woman the group meets at the pole, was born sick, born dying, and as an infant her parents brought her to that same oasis and laid her in the water. And the moon spirit gave a piece of its own life to save her, which is why she has white hair, because she has carried a fragment of the moon inside her since she was a baby. So when Zhao kills the moon spirit, Yue understands what she is and what she has to do. She goes to the oasis and she gives the life the moon once gave her back to it, willingly, and in doing so she dies as a human girl and becomes the new moon spirit, rising into the sky to restore the moon and give waterbending back to the world. A teenage girl the audience had known for a handful of episodes chooses to stop being alive, chooses to become the moon so that everyone else can keep their magic and their lives. And she ascends, and she is up there still, the moon itself, watching over a boy named Sokka who loved her and had to let her go. The show killed the moon, and then had a girl become the moon to fix it, and it did all of that in an animated series for children. And if you have ever wondered why people who grew up on this show get a little emotional trying to explain it to someone who did not, it is scenes like that one, the sheer weight of what the show was willing to put on screen and trust its young audience to carry. As long as we are collecting the things the show went further with than anyone expected, there are a few more worth naming because the went too far angle is a real one, and it deserves honesty. There is the simple structural horror we keep circling, the severed connection to the past avatars, and I want to name what that actually means in human terms rather than cosmic ones, because it is easy to let it stay abstract. It means that Korra, a young woman barely into her 20s, dealing with more than any person should have to deal with, permanently lost the ability to talk to the only people in existence who could truly understand what she was going through. The thousands of previous versions of herself, every avatar before her when things got unbearable, could sit in meditation and reach a predecessor, could ask Aang or Roku or Kyoshi what to do, could feel the weight of 10,000 years of company. And Korra had that, and then it was ripped away in a single fight. And for the rest of her life, she is the loneliest avatar there has ever been, doing the hardest job in the world with no ancestors behind her. The franchise took its central figure and stripped her of her entire lineage, and it never gave it back. And there is something almost unbearably bleak about how permanent that is, how the show refused the easy comfort of undoing it. There is also, in the sequel, a change to the very structure of the world that most people underrate, which is that Korra chose to leave the spirit portals open. For 10,000 years, since Wan, the human world and the spirit world had been kept separate, the portals sealed, and there were good reasons for that separation because the two worlds are dangerous to each other. And Korra, at the end of the second book, made a unilateral decision to leave the portals open to let the two worlds mix again for the first time in 10 millennia. Spirits wandering into human cities, vines of spirit energy growing up through the streets of Republic City. She changed the fundamental arrangement of reality on her own judgment, and the rest of the sequel is partly about the consequences of that. The chaos and the beauty of a world where the boundary is gone. It is an actually radical thing for a hero to do, to decide that a 10,000-year-old separation was a mistake and to simply end it. And the show is honest that it made everything more complicated, that there was no clean answer, that Korra's boldest choice was also her most arguable one. And there are the smaller, strange powers tucked into the corners, the ones that show how deep the bending system really goes once you stop looking at the four basic arts. There is spirit bending, the ability to purify a spirit that has turned dark and violent, to calm the corruption in it and return it to what it was, used by Korra's uncle Unalaq before he betrayed everyone, and later by Korra herself. There is plant bending, a specialized form of water bending practiced by the people of the Foggy Swamp, who cannot always find open water but who learn to control the water inside living plants, to bend the vines and the trees themselves by reaching for the moisture in them. There is Jinora, Tenzin's daughter, Aang's granddaughter, an airbender so spiritually gifted that she can project her own spirit out of her body, send her consciousness across great distances as a glowing presence, an ancient and rare airbending discipline she is naturally suited to. And it is her projection that helps save Korra at two different crucial moments, the little girl whose spirit can leave her body becoming, in a sense, the especially powerful airbender of her generation. The world of Avatar is not four powers. It is four powers that each contain a dozen hidden ones. And the deeper you look, the more you realize the writers had thought through implications the show only had time to gesture at. And now we are at the very bottom of the iceberg, the coldest and darkest water, where the ice gives way to open theory. And I have to change how I talk because everything down here is unconfirmed. And the whole discipline of a video like this is refusing to let a good theory dress itself up as a fact. So from here to the end, when I tell you something, I'm going to tell you exactly what kind of thing it is. A reading, a fan idea, an open question, and I am not going to pretend the dark water has a floor I can see, because mostly it does not. Let's start with the biggest reading, the one that is not a fact but is, I think, unquestionably true in the way that literature is true, which is the reading of the Fire Nation as fascism. The show never uses the word. It is set in a fantasy world with no real-world nations in it. But the argument that the Fire Nation is a study of fascism is one of the more widely held interpretations of the whole series, and the evidence for it is woven through everything. You have an empire built on the belief that its people are inherently superior and destined to rule the others. You have a cult of the leader, a Fire Lord treated as semi-divine. You have the rewriting of history, an entire nation of children taught in school, that the war is a glorious civilizing mission and that the Air Nomads had an army, when the Air Nomads were pacifist monks who were massacred. You have the propaganda, the youth indoctrination, the genocide justified as destiny. This is a reading, not a statement of authorial intent, and I want to keep that line clean, but it is a reading the text supports so thoroughly that it is hard to watch the show as an adult and not see it, and it is a large part of why the series feels so much heavier than its premise. The show was gently teaching a generation of children how an ordinary-seeming nation talks itself into atrocity, and how the people inside it, people like Zuko, have to individually decide to see through the story they were raised on. That is interpretation, but it is interpretation the show is practically holding the door open for. Then there are the pure fan theories, the ones with much less ground under them, and I will flag each one clearly as we go, because this is where invented certainty does the greatest damage. There is a popular and lovely fan theory that the painted lady, the river spirit Katara impersonates, is somehow connected to Yue, the girl who became the moon, that the two luminous, self-sacrificing feminine spirits are secretly the same being or somehow linked. It is a beautiful idea, and there is essentially nothing in the actual show to support it. The painted lady is presented as her own separate river spirit, and Yue is the moon. and the connection lives entirely in the fandom's desire for the world's mythology to rhyme more neatly than it does. So enjoy it as a fan idea if you like it, but it is a fan idea, full stop, not a confirmed link, and anyone presenting it as canon is inventing a bridge the writers never built. There's another recurring question that sits right at the boundary between theory and open canon, which is whether an avatar could ever be born a non-bender or born unable to bend the elements normally. And the honest answer is that this is unresolved and mostly the territory of fan speculation. The rules as we know them say the avatar is the reincarnation of a specific spirit and cycles through the nations, and there is no canon example of an avatar who could not bend. But the deep mechanics of exactly what would happen in various edge cases are the kind of thing fans love to argue, and the creators have largely left open. So if you hear a confident answer to what an avatar could or could not be, treat it as someone's theory rather than a rule, because a claim about what the world allows is a factual claim, and this particular one has no confirmed answer. Here is a smaller open question that I find really interesting, and it is about Zuko and lightning. We established earlier that Zuko can redirect lightning but is never shown generating it, and the common fan explanation is that his inner turmoil prevents it, that he never found the peace of mind the technique requires. That explanation is reasonable, and it fits everything we see. But notice that it is an inference, not a stated fact. The show never actually tells us that Zuko cannot generate lightning. It simply never shows him doing it. Whether that is because he truly cannot, or because the writers just never wrote the scene, or because by the time he had the necessary piece the story no longer called for it, is not something the canon settles. It is a small thing, but it is a perfect example of the trap at this depth, the way the absence of a scene gets softly upgraded into a rule about a character. And I try to notice when I am doing that, because it is so easy to do. And then there is the oldest fan argument of all, the one that is pure meme and pure joy, the endless debate over whether Avatar is an anime. Technically, in the strict sense, it is not, because anime as a term specifically means animation produced in Japan, and Avatar was created by two Americans and made for an American network. So by the literal definition, it is an American animated series that is deeply, lovingly influenced by anime, drawing heavily on Japanese animation's visual language and pacing and emotional seriousness. But the argument never actually dies because the spirit of the question is not really about where it was drawn. It is about whether a Western cartoon earned the right to be spoken of alongside the anime that inspired it. And the reason people keep having the argument is that the answer emotionally feels like yes, even when the answer technically is no. It is the friendliest fight in the whole fandom, and it is a nice thing to find down here at the bottom. A disagreement that is really just a bunch of people insisting the show they love belongs in the highest company they can name. I even have a soft spot for the smallest deep-cut jokes, the ones that live at the border of canon and running gag, like the way fans love to imagine that the perpetually suffering cabbage merchant, the man whose cart is destroyed over and over, eventually built his misfortune into an empire, because by the sequel era, there is a large produce company in the world, and fans delight in connecting it back to that one long-suffering man and his ruined vegetables. Let me name that plainly for what it is, a fan connection that the sequel gestures at more than it formally spells out. But it is exactly the kind of thing that makes this world feel alive, the sense that even the throwaway joke character got a whole life and maybe, eventually, the last laugh. Whether the show ever truly confirms that lineage is the sort of detail I would rather flag as a fond fan reading than state as fact. And that instinct to flag rather than assert is really the whole spirit of this descent. Because that is the thing the bottom of the iceberg teaches you if you sit in the cold long enough. The deeper you go into any beloved story, the more the solid facts thin out and the theories rush in to fill the space. And the temptation always is to keep talking with the same confidence you had up at the surface, to let a reading harden into a rule and a fan idea harden into canon, because certainty is comfortable and uncertainty is not. And the discipline, the only honest discipline, is to keep saying the quiet, true thing, which is that we do not know, that the show left this open, that this part is somebody's beautiful guess. There is a version of this video that would have told you Zuko cannot generate lightning, and that the painted lady is Yue, and that the grandmother's name is Ila, and that Toph invented metal bending in a Fire Nation cart. and it would have sounded more confident than this one, and it would have been wrong, and you would probably never have known. I would rather be honest and a little less certain, because a story this carefully made deserves to be talked about carefully, all the way down to the bottom. Before we start the long climb back toward the surface, there are a few deep pieces of the machinery I want to lay out, because they are the kind of thing that is fully canon and fully verifiable, and yet somehow still surprises people. The load-bearing rules that the show built entire episodes around, and that reward you enormously for having understood. The first is the whole system of how the sky governs bending, because the moon we talked about is only one piece of a larger, elegant clockwork. Waterbending draws strength from the moon, which means waterbenders are at their most powerful under a full moon, when Hama could bend blood and when the tides run highest. And it means that during a lunar eclipse, when the moon is blotted out, waterbending fails entirely, the same way it failed when Zhao killed the moon spirit. And firebending has its own celestial master, the sun, because firebending is solar the way waterbending is lunar. And that gives the show one of its most brilliant strategic set pieces, because it means that during a solar eclipse, when the sun is blocked, firebenders lose their power completely. The heroes learn this, and they build an entire invasion around it, an assault on the Fire Nation capital timed precisely to a solar eclipse, a day they call the Day of Black Sun, when for a few minutes the truly powerful firebenders in the world, the Fire Lord included, are rendered as helpless as anyone else. It is a gorgeous piece of world building, a war plan built out of astronomy, and it means the two great opposed nations each carry a hidden vulnerability written into the sky itself. The fire people dark during an eclipse of the sun, the water people dark during an eclipse of the moon, and Sazan's comet as the wild card that tips the balance catastrophically toward fire once a century. The elements are not just powers, they are tied to the actual heavens, and the plot lives and dies by the calendar. The second piece of machinery worth laying out is the culture of the Air Nomads themselves, because they are the people the whole tragedy is built on, and the show gives you more about them than a first watch registers. There were 4 air temples, one at each compass point, and they were divided by gender, 2 temples of monks and 2 of nuns, the northern and southern air temples and the eastern and western, and the Air Nomads had no concept of a nation the way the others did. No central government, no armies, no borders, just a scattered people of monks and nuns and their sky bison, defined entirely by freedom and detachment and the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. They had no possessions to speak of, no attachment to place, which is exactly the philosophy Aang has to wrestle with when he cannot let go of Katra at that final chakra, because his own culture told him that attachment is the thing that binds you and that a truly free person holds nothing too tightly, and the whole tension of Aang's character is a boy raised to let go of everything who cannot bring himself to let go of the people he loves, which is, when you think about it, the deeply human failure of enlightenment there is. In the airbending tattoos, the blue arrows are the mark of mastery, earned, not given, awarded to an airbender who has mastered the discipline. Aang earned his young, unusually young, because he invented a new airbending technique, the air scooter, a spinning ball of air, a bender rides like a wheel. And inventing a new technique is one of the ways a young airbender proves mastery. So the arrows on Aang's body are not just a tribal marking, they are a credential, the sign that this 12-year-old was a genuine airbending master before the world ever froze him. A prodigy, the way Azula was a prodigy, the way Toph was a prodigy. And the show is full of these gifted children who carry more than any child should. And that culture, that entire gentle, tattooed, bison-riding, possession-free civilization, is what Sazan erased in a single day with the help of a comet, which is why every time an airbending detail surfaces in the deep canon, whether it is Guru Lagima flying 4,000 years ago, or the Air Nation being reborn from non-benders in the sequel, it lands with extra weight because you're watching the fragments of a murdered people, the last echoes of something almost completely destroyed. There is one more deep beat I do not want to leave the water without, and it is about Appa, because it is easy to treat the flying bison as a pet, a cute mount, comic relief with 6 legs, and the show has other ideas. Appa is not just Aang's animal. Appa is one of the last sky bison alive, a survivor of the same near extinction as the Air Nomads themselves, which means that when Aang looks at Appa, he is looking at the last living piece of his entire world. the only other creature left who knew the temples when they were full. And in the second book, the show does something almost cruel with that, because Appa is stolen, taken from Aang by sandbenders in the desert, and sold. And there is an entire episode devoted to what happens to Appa alone, passed from owner to owner, mistreated, frightened, trying to find his way home across a hostile world. And it is one of the more understated and heartbreaking things the series ever made, a story with almost no dialogue about a gentle animal enduring loss after loss. Aang's grief over losing Appa, his desperation, his uncharacteristic rage, all of it makes sense only when you understand that Appa is not a pet, Appa is family, Appa is the last of 2 dying species that Aang belongs to, and losing him is losing the final thread back to the world that was taken. When they are reunited, it is not a boy getting his animal back. It is 2 of the last survivors of a genocide finding each other again, and the show trusts you to feel the difference without ever spelling it out. So that is the bottom, and everything from the founding of bending to the murdered airbenders to the loneliest avatar in 10,000 years. And if you are still awake, you may have noticed that the deeper we went, the sadder it got. And that is not an accident of what I chose, it is the shape of the thing itself. The surface of Avatar is bright and funny and full of cabbages. And every layer down toward the truth of it is a little darker and a little more about loss, until at the very bottom you find that this cheerful children's adventure is, in its bones, a story about genocide and grief and the almost unbearable responsibility of trying to break cycles of violence that are older than anyone alive. And yet, and this is the part I keep coming back to, it never once feels hopeless, because for every dark thing at the bottom of this iceberg there is a corresponding act of grace. A boy who refuses to kill, an uncle who lies to save the last dragons, a girl who becomes the moon, a spirit who keeps a promise to a dying man for 10,000 years. The darkness and the grace are the same depth. You cannot reach one without reaching the other, and that balance, that refusal to let the dark be the final word, is exactly what the whole show is named after. Now let's start back up toward the light. Coming up out of the deep water, I want to spend a little while on why the show could hold all of that darkness without collapsing under it, because the answer is craft, and the craft is worth admiring on its own terms. The first thing that separates Avatar from almost everything around it is that it was built as a single planned story with an ending in mind. 3 books, a beginning, a middle, and a real end, rather than an open-ended series that runs until the ratings fall. That sounds like a small thing, and it is the difference between a show that means something and a show that just continues. Because the creators knew where they were going, they could plant things early that pay off late. And the series is threaded with foreshadowing so patient that you only catch most of it on a second watch. A throwaway line in the first book turns out to be load-bearing in the third. A minor character glimpsed in a crowd becomes central seasons later. The Fire Nation propaganda play that mocks the whole cast near the end works only because there was a whole coherent show for it to mock. And the ending, when it comes, actually resolves. Every major character arrives somewhere earned. Nobody is left dangling because the writers ran out of season. In an era of television where so many beloved shows stumble at the finish, fumbling their last act because they never planned one, Avatar landed its ending cleanly, and that alone puts it in rare company. The second thing, and the one I keep circling back to, is the respect it had for the children watching it. This is a show that trusted a young audience with genocide, with grief, with brainwashing, with a girl choosing to die to become the moon, with a villain who is a frightened, broken child rather than a monster to be booed, with the idea that the man who killed your mother might be too pathetic to be worth killing. It never talked down. It never softened the hard truth into a lesson and then underlined the lesson. It let things be complicated, and it let things hurt, and it trusted that kids could feel the weight and grow into understanding it. And that trust is exactly why the people who watched it as children are the ones making and watching videos like this. 1-2 decades later, because the show grew as they grew, revealing more the older they got. A lot of children's media is designed to be outgrown. Avatar was designed to be caught up to. And the growth is not only in the audience, it is in every single character, which is the third piece of the craft. Everyone in this show changes. Aang has to grow from a boy who runs from responsibility into someone who can carry the whole world without losing himself. Katara has to move through her grief and her anger without being consumed by them. Zuko we have walked through at length. And then there is Sokka, who deserves a real moment here, because he is the one without any bending at all, the ordinary boy in a story full of superpowers, and the show could have left him as comic relief and instead gave him one of its most satisfying arcs. He starts out as the joke, and worse than the joke, he starts out openly dismissive of female warriors, until he meets the Kyoshi warriors and their leader Suki and is thoroughly, deservedly humbled, and he grows out of it. And by the end, he has become the plan maker, the strategist, whose ideas win battles, the boy who seeks out a swordmaster named Piandao and trains until he can stand beside benders as an equal with nothing but steel and wit. Sokka is the show's argument that you do not need to be born special to matter, that cleverness and loyalty and the willingness to grow are their own kind of power. And in a story about chosen ones and prodigies, the ordinary brother who makes himself formidable might be the most reassuring figure of all. The one who tells the kid in the audience with no magic that there is still a place for them at the center of the story. I think that is finally why the show refused to die, why it did not fade into the pile of good cartoons that had their moment and were forgotten. It kept finding new life. It came back on streaming and a whole new generation discovered it cold, with no nostalgia, and loved it just as fiercely as the people who had waited week to week for it the first time, which almost never happens. A show reaching kids who were not even born when it aired and landing just as hard. The comics kept the story going for the fans who could not let the world go. The novels went digging into the deep past and found that it held up, that the world was solid enough to bear the weight of prose. The sequel series divided people and challenged them and aged into far more respect than it got at first, especially for how honestly it dealt with trauma and how softly it made its central romance canon on a children's network. And through all of it, the fandom stayed, arguing about ships and theories and episode rankings, keeping the whole thing warm so that a show that ended in 2008 feels, right now, more alive than most things currently on the air. That is not an accident. That is what happens when something is made with this much care, when every martial art is real and every character grows and every dark thing is balanced by an act of grace. It earns a kind of permanence. There are two last things I want to leave with you before we surface, and the first is about Iroh, because if you follow the emotional spine of the whole franchise, it runs through him more than through anyone else, and his own story is a tragedy that the show only ever shows you in glimpses. Iroh was not always the gentle, tea-drinking uncle. He was once the crown prince of the Fire Nation, the heir to the throne, a brilliant and feared general, and the reason he carries the name the Dragon of the West is that he led the siege of the great city of Ba Sing Se, a siege that lasted for the better part of 2 years, and he very nearly took the city that no one had ever taken. And in the middle of that siege, his son died. His only son, Lu Ten, was killed in the fighting outside the walls Iroh was trying to break. And the loss broke something in Iroh that never healed and never needed to heal, because it was the making of him. He abandoned the siege. He walked away from the throne he was about to earn, from the war, from the ambition that had defined him, because standing over the death of his child, he understood, all at once, the cost of the thing he had spent his life pursuing. And in his absence, his younger brother Ozai maneuvered his way to the crown that should have been Iroh's, which is the seed of everything, because it is that grasping, that stepping over a grieving brother to seize power, that produces the Fire Lord Aang has to defeat. The whole war Aang inherits is downstream of one man's ambition and one uncle's grief. And what Iroh does with that grief is the moral center of the entire show, because he takes all the loss and all the regret, and he pours it into his brother's discarded son, into Zuko, the nephew everyone else had given up on, and he loves that angry, broken boy patiently and without condition for years, asking nothing, forgiving everything, because he had already learned in the hardest way possible what a son is worth. When you understand that Iroh is loving Zuko in the place where his own son should be, the standalone episode dedicated to Mako, the one where Iroh privately mourns Lu Ten, stops being a sad interlude and becomes the key to the whole man. Iroh is what grief looks like when it turns into gentleness instead of turning into Ozai. He is the show's quiet promise that suffering does not have to make you cruel, that you can be broken by loss and choose, out of that breaking, to become kind. I do not think there is a wiser character in any children's show ever made, and I do not say that lightly. And loving Zuko was never a small thing to take on because of what had been done to the boy, which is a piece of the story worth stating plainly since it is the wound the whole long redemption grows out of. Zuko's scar, the burn that covers the left side of his face, is not from a battle. His own father gave it to him. When Zuko was 13, he was allowed to sit in on a war council, and he spoke up against a general's plan, a plan that would have sacrificed an entire division of young Fire Nation soldiers as bait, throwing away their lives to win a battle. Zuko objected because it was cruel, because those were their own people being spent like nothing, and in the rigid honor code of the Fire Nation, speaking out of turn in that room was treated as a disrespect that had to be answered in a fire duel, an Agni Kai. Zuko agreed, thinking he would face the general he had contradicted. But because he had spoken in the Fire Lord's war room, the person he had disrespected was ruled to be his own father, Ozai. And so a 13-year-old boy was made to duel the most powerful firebender in the nation. And when Zuko saw who he was meant to fight, he refused. He fell to the ground, and he begged his father for mercy. And Ozai's answer to his son's mercy, his answer to a boy who had objected to cruelty and then would not raise a hand against his own father, was to burn him. Ozai pressed fire into his kneeling son's face, scarred him for life, and then banished him, telling him he could only return home if he captured the Avatar, a task everyone believed was impossible because the Avatar had been gone for 100 years. That is where the boy we meet in the first episode comes from. The angry, obsessive prince hunting a child across the world is a 13-year-old who was burned and thrown out by his own father for the crime of caring whether soldiers lived or died, and who was told that the love he was starving for could only be earned by doing something that could not be done. When you hold that next to Iroh choosing to pour a father's love into that same boy, the whole shape of the thing comes clear. The original series is, at its core, two answers to the question of what a father is: Ozai and Iroh, cruelty and grace, standing on either side of one scarred boy, and the entire show is Zuko slowly, painfully learning which one to become. The second thing is a reading rather than a fact, so I will mark it as one, but it is a reading that makes the whole franchise click into a sharper shape, and it is about the villains, because if you line them up across both series, they are not a random gallery of bad guys, they are almost a deliberate survey of the ways power goes wrong, a study of political extremism dressed as a fantasy adventure. Ozai is the oldest and simplest kind, the tyrant of pure conquest and supremacy, might making right, a nation convinced of its own destiny to rule. And then the sequel takes that and refracts it into 4 modern shapes, one per book, each a different answer to the question of what to do about an unequal world. Amon is revolution, curdled into terror, a man who names a real injustice, the way benders hold power over non-benders and then answers it by stripping people of who they are. Unalak is zealotry, the true believer who is so certain he serves a higher spiritual truth that he will burn the world to bring his gods back. Zahir is anarchism, the conviction that all order is oppression and that freedom can only be found in tearing every structure down. And Kuvira is nationalism, order, and unity and strength offered to a frightened, broken country as the answer to its chaos, the strongman who saves you by taking everything. Read this way, the 2 series together are a single argument, worked out across dozens of hours, that there is no clean ideology that solves the problem of power, that conquest and revolution and faith and anarchy and unity each become monstrous when they stop seeing the individual human being in front of them, and that the only thing that ever actually works, the thing both avatars land on at the end, is the refusal to treat a person as a means to an end. Aang takes the fire out of Ozai instead of his life. Korra follows Kuvira into the spirit portal and offers her understanding instead of a fist. The argument the franchise keeps making, under all the bending and all the spirits, is that mercy is not weakness and that seeing the person is the whole of wisdom. And I think that is why it has lasted, because that is a true thing, and it turns out you can put a true thing in front of children, and they will feel it long before they can name it. And they will carry it, and some of them will grow up and make 3-hour videos in the dark, trying to explain to strangers why a cartoon about a boy in an iceberg mattered so much. Before that last climb, let me gather a small handful of deep cuts I could not bear to leave down in the dark unmentioned, the kind of detail that rewards a close watch. The first is about the people in this world who cannot bend at all and beat the benders anyway, because it is a thread the whole franchise cares about more than it lets on. Tai Li, the cheerful acrobat who follows Azula, has no bending, and she is terrifying because she practices chai blocking, striking a series of precise points on a person's body so fast and so exactly that she temporarily shuts off their bending entirely and leaves their limbs limp. A girl who does cartwheels can walk up to a firebender and, with a few jabs, make them as powerless as anyone else. And that idea that the right knowledge of the body can neutralize the mightiest bender does not stay a party trick. It grows up in the sequel series into Amon and the Equalists, a whole movement of non-benders who refuse to accept that the benders should rule them, and the tension between benders and non-benders that Tai Li embodies as almost a joke in the original series becomes the central political wound of the sequel. The show was thinking about who holds power and who does not from very early, and it planted the question in the body of a giggling acrobat before it ever grew into a revolution. The second deep cut is about Toph again, because her power has limits that the show is careful and honest about, and the limits are half of what makes it feel real. Toph sees through her feet, through the vibrations that travel up from the ground into her bare soles, which means her sight is a kind of touch, and it can do things ordinary sight cannot. She can feel a person's heartbeat and their breathing through the earth, which makes her a living lie detector, able to tell when someone is nervous or dishonest by the flutter of their pulse in the ground. But it also means at the moment her feet leave the earth, she goes blind. On sand, the vibrations scatter and everything blurs. On ice, she is helpless. Put her in shoes or lift her off the ground or set her on a wooden ship at sea, and the most perceptive person in the room becomes the most vulnerable. The show never lets her power be a magic wand. It gives her a way of seeing that is astonishing and specific and breakable. And the breakability is exactly why she never feels overpowered, because you always know the one thing that takes her sight away. And the third deep cut is the strangest and the most spiritual, and it lives in a swamp. When the group passes through the foggy swamp, they meet a tribe of waterbenders who bend the water inside the vines in the trees, the plant benders we mentioned far back near the top of this descent, and their leader shares a piece of the world's deepest philosophy, which is that the entire swamp, every tree and vine in it, is not many plants at all. It is one plant, a single enormous banyan grove tree, whose roots and branches spread out for miles and connect everything, so that what looks like a whole forest is really one living thing wearing the disguise of many. And the swamp people take from that a belief about all of existence, that time and distance are illusions, that every living thing is connected in the same way the swamp is, one great organism that only looks separate. It is offered as their spiritual conviction rather than as a hard law of the world, so I will mark it as their belief. But it is the kind of idea the show plants like a seed and lets grow, because it is the same truth Wan learned when he merged with Raava, the same truth the Avatar exists to embody, that the four nations and the two worlds and all the separate struggling people are underneath a single connected thing, and that the whole job of the Avatar across 10,000 years is to keep reminding a world that keeps forgetting. A tree that looks like a forest, a planet that looks like 4 warring nations, one spirit that looks like 1,000 different lives. The show hid its entire thesis in a swamp and trusted you to feel the roots. And one last small thing, because it is the kind of detail that makes the world feel like it has corners you were never shown, and it concerns the White Lotus, the secret society we met back near the top. A society that spans 4 warring nations and has to stay hidden, needs a way for its members to find each other without being caught. And the way they do it is a board game. Pai Sho, a tile game. A bit like a mix of chess and Go, is played all over the world of Avatar. Ordinary people playing it in tea shops and on street corners, and hidden inside that common game is the society's secret handshake. A member of the White Lotus, sitting down across from a stranger, will open by placing the White Lotus tile in the center of the board, a move that means nothing to an ordinary player and everything to another member. If the stranger recognizes it and responds correctly, the two of them know, without a single word spoken aloud, that they are brothers of the same order, and the game becomes a quiet exchange of passwords. It is such a wonderful piece of texture, an entire international brotherhood recognizing itself through the placement of one tile in a game people have been playing near them their whole lives without ever noticing. It is the whole show in miniature, really. Something ancient and meaningful hidden inside something that looks like a child's diversion, waiting for the person who knows how to look. So we are back at the surface now, up out of the cold, and the ice is thin again, and the light reaches all the way down through it. And if you look back the way we came, you can see the whole shape of it. The cabbages and the comet up near the top, and then the Metalbending and the White Lotus, and then the dragons and the badger moles and the first avatar and his promise. And down below that the genocide and the bloodbending and the girl who became the moon, and further still the 230-year-old avatar, and the flying monk and the loneliest avatar in 10,000 years, all the way to the dark open water at the bottom where the theories drift and nobody can quite see the floor. It is a long way down for a children's show. It always was, and that, in the end, is the thing worth holding on to as you drift off. When Avatar, The Last Airbender, first aired, it looked from the outside like one more animated adventure aimed at selling toys and filling an afternoon slot. A bald boy and a flying bison and a running joke about vegetables. And it turned out to be something that grown adults are still taking apart lovingly 2 decades later, still writing about, still discovering for the first time, still finding new floors beneath the floors they thought were the bottom. It sits now in a strange and lovely place in the culture, a show that children adored without understanding all of it, and that those same children, grown up, understand more of every year. A story deep enough that you can fall into it at 7 and still be swimming in it at 30. Very little made for young audiences earns that. Most of it is meant to be enjoyed and set down. Avatar was built to be grown into, layer by layer, exactly the way we went through it tonight. And the fact that its deepest layers are about grief and mercy and the long work of not becoming the people who hurt you is the reason it never ages out from under anyone. I think that is why it makes such good company in the dark. It is a story that took the heaviest things a person can carry, the loss of a whole world, the weight of everyone who came before you, the temptation to answer cruelty with cruelty, and it wrapped them in something warm enough to hand to a child, and it never once lied about how hard any of it was. And it still, after all of that, came down on the side of gentleness. There are not many stories that go that deep and come back up still believing in kindness. This is one of them, and it will be one of them long after all of us have stopped watching. And maybe that is the real reason a video like this can run for hours without ever running out of things to say, because the show was never really about who could throw the biggest rock or the hottest flame. It was about a handful of children carrying more than children should have to carry, and helping each other carry it, and somehow keeping their softness through a war that took everything, and there is no bottom to a story like that. You can keep going down through it for as long as you like, and every layer you reach turns out to be resting on a gentler and sadder and more human one underneath. So let the iceberg drift back into the dark under you. There's nothing left to keep track of now, no more layers to descend, no dates or names to hold, just the slow drift of a boy who slept 100 years and woke up anyway, and chose, out of everything he had lost, to be kind. Let your eyes stay closed, let the details go. You do not need to remember any of it because it will still be here, and so will we the next time you cannot sleep. Thank you for spending this long, quiet stretch of the night with me and with Ember, drifting down through all the layers of a world that turned out to be so much deeper than it ever let on. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.